Sure, I'll do that. This will work.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to go ahead and start the meeting if we could. A couple of orders of the day for sign up. We have a sign up sheet here. If you haven't signed up, please do so. It's the best way for us to get in touch with you. Please leave a way that we can get in contact with you. If it's via email, we have stakeholder emails that we do send out, so it's the best way for us to get in contact with you to make sure that you're aware of upcoming meetings or information that's being posted to state and local websites in regards to this project. My name is Katie Service. I am the airport manager. I have a team with me today that I will introduce you to in a moment. Just wanted to draw your attention to Maria in the corner here. Maria is providing services for Spanish-speaking and Portuguese-speaking individuals. Are there anyone here that will need interpretation services? Please raise your hand. Maria, will you say that in Portuguese and Spanish, please?
Muito boa tarde, eu sou Maria e eu estou aqui para traduzir de inglês para português, se houver alguém que necessitar dos meus serviços. Buenas tardes, eu sou Maria e estou aqui para traduzir para ustedes se desean, se necesitan, claro. Gracias.
Okay, thank you very much. We are reserving comments until the end of the presentation. So if you could jot down your comments, we will go back to any slides that you wish us to go back to. Our team that's here, we have a few experts that are here in different fields. So I might divert the conversation over to one of those experts to answer any questions that you may have. If for some reason we can't get back to you tonight with an answer, we will follow up with you. Just make sure you provide us with your information. For those that do have an opportunity or do want to have an opportunity to comment or to ask any questions at the end of the presentation, we have a sign-up sheet over here to the left of me. That's just so that we can have anyone that wants to ask questions, we'll just put it in an orderly fashion for the sign-up sheet. So just let us know as we proceed forward. Okay, just a few things on meeting guidelines. Just want to go through that. Let me just bring us through the next slide. So the speakers, the airport, as well as our on-call and engineers and planners that we have with us today, we're going to cover a lot of topics that are listed in the agenda. We'll go through that with you in a moment. After the presentation, like I said, there'll be time for questions and answers. Again, state your name, state your relationship to the project before your question so that we know who you are, we know what your concerns are, we know what community you might be coming from and what community you might be representing. Please share only one question or comment at a time to allow others that want to participate in question and answer. That would be helpful. And all questions and comments are welcome. However, we do just ask that you do it in a respectful manner. Just like any town council meeting that we have here at the town of Barnstable, the same would be true for this meeting as well. So the agenda for this evening, I'm just going to ask our group to stand up if they would. Again, Katie Service, I'm the airport manager. With me is Matt Elia. He's the assistant airport manager. We have Alyssa Jacobs with Epsilon. She is the project manager for this environmental assessment. With her is Nate Rodding. Nate Rodding is also with Epsilon. And then we have Ryan with Epsilon as well. He's our noise expert that will be assisting us on the project. We have our team from Howard Stein Hudson, Ashley and Will. They're here also to help us through the process and to answer any questions that you might have and to assist us. The current project environmental review status, we just want to give you a background of where we are and where we're going. Not all of you have been to all of our meetings. This is the third public meeting. The first public meeting was in October, and that was an introductory meeting to tell you about what was happening with the project, the proposed master plan, and the proposed projects that were identified in that master plan. The second public meeting was associated with the first state agency, the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act office. They had the second meeting in January, and it was associated with the environmental notification form and the eventual certificate that they gave us, which was based on comments that they received from our community during that meeting and after that meeting. And then we're here today with the third public meeting. What we're going to cover today is some additional impact analysis and alternatives. We chose 3 basic projects. There's 10 projects in total for the airport master plan that we're proposing. Of the 3 basic projects that we're going over today for this presentation are because we received a lot of comments on these 3 projects in particular. So we wanted to make sure that we hit the highlights of where the concerns where the concerns were for our community, make sure that we answered the questions that were associated with those particular projects. But the other projects will be reviewed. I will go through a couple of slides here in a moment that outline that and let you know. But those other projects will be reviewed. But we wanted to hit on the topics that were of most importance to our community. We will go through the project meeting and meeting timelines and then follow up with questions. So I've already introduced our staff. We're going to post this presentation on our website. Our website, flyhya.com, has a page that's dedicated to the environmental assessment. Anything that we've done, any upcoming meetings, press releases, presentations, that's all available on that website. We are also recording this meeting, so it will be available through the town of Barnstable, through Channel 18, so anyone can take a look at it if they wish to, and let us know if you need us to go back to the slide at any point in time. So the current project and environmental review status, basically where, I'll go back to that, where have we been and where are we going? So just a highlight again, I spoke about the project team meeting in October. That was our first public meeting. We then proceeded forward into November with the MEPA, or Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act, environmental notification form meeting. That meeting was held in January. At all of these points in time, we opened up the doors for comments, to receive comments from the community. We established a website. You can see it there right underneath the title, the EnviroHYA at epsilonassociates.com. That is the website for any questions that you might have. Just note that the state agencies, the MEPA office, the federal office, they have different means of you providing comments, and we'll show you that in a couple of slides. But if you have any questions, you can always email us at that email address. Today, we're here at the public meeting number 3 for June 21st. We had a meeting earlier today that was a virtual meeting, and then today, obviously, is the in-person meeting to give plenty of opportunity for those that wanted to attend the meeting. The next step after this will be to develop that draft environmental notification form. We are combining what is required for local, state, and federal agencies. So the reporting that we're doing will cover all of the requirements and regulatory processes of all 3 agencies. So we'll be doing that as a joint effort. That's common for most projects such as this, to have a joint filing of the documentation. That will take place for the draft EIR. We think, Alyssa, you said August timeframe, August-September timeframe will be when you have the first review of the draft environmental notification form. And how, excuse me, not the draft EIR, excuse me. The reporting that I'm talking about, it can get very confusing because we have 3 entities or 3 agencies that we must respond to in regards to an environmental assessment. We have the state entity, which is the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Office. We have NEPA, which is the federal, it's the same thing as MEPA, but for the federal government, and that is the NEPA office, that's the federal process. Then we have the local process, which is, goes through the Cape Cod Commission, and they have a DRI process. All of these processes require just about the same amount of information when we're analyzing the projects, but I just wanted you to be aware of it because I don't want it to be confusing. Our website identifies those 3 processes, so you can take a look at our website to see what process we have to go through, but it's very prescriptive. So we are following that process. So the next report that you'll see from us is that draft EIR. That draft EIR is based on comments that we received in January through the ENF notification form. Any questions that come up tonight that lead us to look at new alternatives or look at other options will inform that draft environmental report as well. So that's another time for you as community members to take a look at that documentation. We're trying to provide it all in one place for you, but there's several locations you can find it. But I would suggest you can go to our website or you can go to the state's website to take a look at it. Did I leave anything out, Alyssa?
I would just note that these are planning level documents when the process is concluded by the state, federal, and local agencies. That's where your.
Excuse me.
Come on up.
This is a planning level type of documentation. So when these processes are concluded at the local, state, and federal level, that is when we get into the actual permitting, which is further down the road as identified here. So I just wanted to clarify the difference between planning level documentation and permitting.
Thank you. So in other words, nothing will happen, no projects will take place until we start going through that permitting. And of course, nothing will happen before the permitting until we've completed all of our reporting and have certificates from federal, state, and local entities. I don't know what happened to this slide, but I think I can wing it. So just in general, the environmental review timeline. So the upcoming draft EIR and EA will address all of the comments that were received as part of the initial environmental notification form that went out in January. So there were a lot of comments in that report. We had about 21 commenters in that report, 4 of which were from various agencies, local, state, and federal agencies. However, the meat of the comments revolved around those 3 topics: taxiway delta because of impacts to wetlands, the additional or runway extension for runway 1533, and noise analysis. So those were the 3 main components, but I can't reiterate this enough. There are a lot of environmental review that we have to do for the 10 total projects that we're looking at, but we're only covering the 3 here tonight due to trying to get through this as efficiently as possible, answering your most concerned questions. Proposed improvements, I know it might be hard to see on that screen. We do have this slide that's available on our website as well. The 10 proposed improvements include making adjustments to our existing taxiways. 3 taxiways need improvements: taxiway Bravo, Delta, and Echo. And that is for the purpose of meeting federal aviation design requirements. So we are meeting those elements. The yellow that you see are the taxiway improvements. We also have the runway extension that's in there as well. The red that you see up on the screen is pavement that's going to be removed. So it's basically associated with the taxiways that we have to make modifications to meet FAA design criteria. So those taxiways will be removed, but they will be replaced with an improved taxiway. Then we have apron development that's in the shaded green area, and then we have some development that's occurring around the terminal improvements, as well as getting ready for electric aviation. Yes, the switch is right there, Matt, or Nate, on the back. Thank you. She's got control. Is that better? Do you want one more in the middle? Okay. We will run over there and put it back on. She's going to, yeah. Is that better? Okay, great. So the above proposed improvements are the results of the Airport Master Plan. That came out of the process that we did. It was completed in May of 2022. It was approved by the FAA for further environmental review. We're in the environmental review. So now we're reviewing those 10 proposed projects that were in the master plan. These are the proposed projects. This is a summary of the phased projects. So phase 1, we put the dates in there for what we thought was realistic for us to proceed forward and based on FAA availability for assistance with funding.
Can you go back to that?
Sure. Okay. The purpose, the proposed projects have a purpose and need statement. This is something that's required by the state and federal agencies, that we identify what is the purpose of these projects, why are we moving forward with them. The proposed projects will improve overall operational safety and efficiency at Cape Cod Gateway Airport by doing one of the following, or all of the following: eliminating non-standard taxiway design and geometries, which is what I just spoke about. The FAA has particular criteria in which to improve safety, not that the airport is unsafe, that's not what we're trying to say, but the airport, the FAA always looks at ways that we can improve safety whenever possible. As you can imagine, a lot of these airports, especially in Massachusetts, were built many, many years ago, back in the 1920s and 30s. They were designed in a different manner back at those times. A lot of airports are just coming up to standards and bringing their airports up to standards. Even after the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, there's still some airports out there that haven't changed some of their geometries. So we're in that same boat. One of our taxiways was the result of an old runway that used to be here, and it's now a taxiway, but it doesn't meet the design standards. So eliminate non-standard taxiway designs. Providing a reasonable and balanced approach to meeting runway length requirements for the existing and future aircraft families that utilize the airport, and meeting FAA updated mandatory design standards overall. The proposed projects will enhance and maintain safe and efficient landside facilities as well, and ensure that we're compliant with federal and state standards. The proposed projects will also develop opportunities to promote financial self-sufficiency at the airport, economic growth for the community, and energy sustainability at the airport as well. And I'll go through those in a few moments. So the additional impact analyses, this is based on comments that we heard from you. I just want to go through where we are from the airport master plan. So the master plan had a certain level of screening. I know the screen is hard to see. I wish I used different colors, but I didn't. The master plan, you start with an overall view of what are the potential needs for the airport. And it's a high-level view. It's a high-level view of, you know, do you meet all of your design criteria? You have to look at that. We're obligated to look at that from the FAA. By the way, the FAA requires that we look at a master plan and we update our master plan anytime there's a change at the airport, there's a significant decline or increase in operations, we're obligated to look at that. It was time for us to do the master plan. We started it in 2018, and when we did that, we identified the facilities on the airport that needed some modifications, and of that came the 10+ projects that we're talking about, including the runway extension. So we did a cursory review of these alternatives. We said, what is realistic in moving forward? So we provided screening criteria for the master plan level, again, high level, but screening criteria that we were very near and dear to be able to push a project further into the environmental review process. The dotted line identifies the environmental review process, which is where we are today. So it goes through its own level of screening. It refines that level of screening, and you'll see that in a moment. So when we looked at the runway length alternatives, we looked at a range of runway lengths. This environmental assessment will further refine that and say, okay, let's dig a little bit deeper, let's look a little bit closer at what those lengths look like. Rather than giving a range, let's hone into what is really needed at the airport. So that's what the EA focus has been on, honing in, refining some of those alternatives. Again, these are the summary of improvements, and today we're only going to be talking about the extension of the runway and the impacts that are associated with Taxiway Delta. But if you want to talk about any other projects, we certainly can. If not, it will be part of the draft EIR. So regulatory impact categories, we are obligated to look at all of these types of potential impacts. So air quality, biological resources, climate change and resiliency, hazardous materials, farmlands, historical and archaeological significant resources. We're required to look at all of that, and we are looking at that as part of the draft EIR. All of the projects will be looked at with that vein. The impact categories will be assessed for each of the projects that we're proposing. The MEPA has review thresholds that do require that we look into a particular project if it trips certain thresholds. So as you can see there, we have all projects where we have the creation of 10 or more acres of impervious surface. Maybe not one project alone will constitute this or trip this, but combined cumulatively, the projects may trip this, so we have to look at that. That's a MEPA threshold that is tripped. Alteration of 50 or more acres of land, again, the cumulative impact of all of our projects that we're looking at could trip that, so we're obligated to look at it. Wetlands, alteration of a half acre or other of wetlands. Taxiway Delta does just that, and we're looking at ways that we can possibly mitigate for that impact. The runway expansion of existing runway at an airport. MEPA thresholds requires that. That is one of the thresholds that is tripped. We are looking at that. Construction of a new taxiway at an airport. We're evaluating that because of modifications that we have to make to those existing taxiways that also trip that threshold. Alyssa, did I leave anything out? Okay. Environmental assessment refined the alternatives. So again, Taxiway Delta, we'll start with that one first. So Taxiway Delta alternatives, we really looked at this and said, we know we have an obligation to meet the design criteria that FAA puts in front of us. Okay, how do we do that? Because we know that we're in close proximity to a wetland. So how do we reduce wetland impacts? We evaluated additional side slope designs and taxiway layouts that could still meet our purpose and need, but could also reduce those impacts to that wetland. We looked at eliminating direct access from the ramp to the runway, removing non-standard taxiway intersection geometries. That would help us meet our purpose and need. So we went into that looking at this project saying, okay, we have a wetland that we're going to impact. How do we deal with that? So we completed wetland delineation of Upper Gate Pond in the wetlands nearby. We completed surveys, bathymetric surveys to determine the pond bottom elevations, the depth of the pond. We investigated the existing sediment characteristics of the pond to understand the geotechnical design. And then we identified several conceptual design elements of the taxiway to see what would make the most sense. So in looking at Taxiway Delta, the best way that we could look at to minimize the impacts to the pond, we looked at three options. 4:1 is the middle one. That's the standard to meet the object-free area requirements of the FAA. So 4:1 slope going off of the taxiway, that's the standard. That's the middle graphic that you see there. A retaining wall is another alternative that we can look at. The retaining wall would be put in, and although it would have minimal impacts to the wetland, initially during construction it would actually have more impacts because we would have to, we'd have smaller impacts that we'd have to protect for. In looking at design criteria, we may be allowed to do a 2:1 slope. So that is the graphic on the left. Increasing the slope grading within the taxiway object-free area, and that will help minimize the associated impacts with Upper Gate Pond. So, of course, as part of the mitigation, we always have, minimizing impact, we always have some type of mitigation. So in the draft environmental impact report, which you will see sometime in August, September timeframe, that will have the mitigation criteria as well. So we'll start identifying, okay, if we're going to impact this wetland, what are we going to do from a mitigation standpoint? Moving on to the runway extension alternatives, one of the things that we did here is we tried to combine text with visuals to help everyone understand what we're looking at for the runway extension. So we have Bob Mallard, who is here, is going to get up in a few moments with Airport Solutions Group. His team worked long and hard on creating animation to help us visualize what the effects of a new runway or an extended runway look like. I'll walk through that in a few moments, but the purpose and need for the runway is to provide a reasonable and balanced approach in meeting runway length requirements for existing and future aircraft families that are using the airport. The project team reviewed the additional operations data from 2018 to 2022. The master plan used 2018 data. They received that data from the air traffic control tower with operations that occur at the airport. Plus, we have a system in place at the airport. It's called Vector. It takes photographs of aircraft coming in and going, so we know what our operations are and the type of aircraft that come in and out of the airport. We use that data for 2018 through 2022 to further refine the master plan runway length analysis and further refine that information. The current runway lengths, 1533, that's the runway we're talking about, is 5,253 feet long. That's going to make sense in a moment. And then the critical aircraft that are utilizing the facility that need runway length now are the aircraft that you see there. So minimum of 500 operations for FAA critical operational threshold. That's what they're looking at. That's what the FAA looks at. But because we have a number of different types of corporate aircraft, the FAA oftentimes will allow for a family of aircraft to be looked at. So the runway design criteria is not changing. We're not upgrading. We're not increasing the runway design criteria. It's maintaining its existing criteria. All that means is the design standards that we're trying to meet through the FAA right now are the same design standards we'll be meeting after this process. The Global Express aircraft, the Gulfstream, the Dassault Falcon, the Embraer 190, which is an aircraft that JetBlue uses now, those are the aircraft that determine our critical aircraft. The runway length analysis, again, current length of 1533 is 5,253 feet. Before I get into the particulars of this slide, when we started to look at the runway length, I come from my background. I used to work for MassDOT Aeronautics. I was the environmental analyst for MassDOT Aeronautics, so all 36 airports in the state. I did that job. Nate, who's with us, did that job as well. Nate and I worked together. We were always obligated to make sure that we're balancing our approach for any airport construction that we're looking at. I worked on Pittsfield Airport's extension to their runway. I've worked at the Plymouth Airport's extension to their runway. All of these runways had a need that was constituted by the users and the customers that were using the facility, but they also had an impact for the community, and we don't want to gloss over that. We understand that. So when we went into the analysis for the runway extension, I said to our team, I said, that was working on the master plan at the time, I said, look, we're not going to go off airport property. We don't want to purchase any land except for navigation easements that we need to clear trees and make sure our approaches are clear. But we don't want to go off airport. We don't want to impact the community in that way that would have to reroute roads and utilities. And we think we can do this on our existing property, within our existing parameters of our property. And in doing that, we looked at over 27 different alternatives. We even included alternatives that looked like at the opposite runway, 624, the other runway. We looked at alternatives that would meet the purpose and need for runway length that for a range of runway length that we were looking for, and what was the best alternative. When we looked at 624, there were just way too many impacts associated with that extension of that runway. It would require movement of a rail line, movement of Yarmouth Road and Willow Street. There were a lot of impacts associated with that particular project that just didn't make it feasible. So during the master plan, those were thrown out. When we said, all right, let's look at alternatives in the master plan for 1533, we looked at over 27 alternatives and different variations of alternatives, and what we came up with, we feel, was a good, balanced approach to meeting the needs of the customers that are at the airport and for the community that uses the airport, as well as a good balanced approach for our community outside of the airfield. So the table that you see above is the airport master plan analysis is your first column. It looked at runway length requirements using the FAA standard analysis, which was runway length charts and graphs that they provide for every single type of aircraft that is out there to determine what the runway length requirement may be for a particular aircraft. So we have put in the ranges because we're not really sure where these aircraft may be flying to. You know, it's a different length for an aircraft that's flying direct to Florida, or an aircraft that's flying to...
Check 1, 2, check 1, 2. Hello, hello. Check 1, 2, check 1, 2. Check.
That was interesting. Anywho, so that first column you see, that's where you see the ranges of runway lengths. So high level again, master plan was high level. It said, we know these aircraft operate out of your facility now, today. We know that they're going to operate there in the future. The master plan also looked at the future aircraft that could potentially be here. We know, and you'll see a slide in a few moments, that JetBlue is changing out their aircraft.
Check.
Thanks, Bob. We know that the aircraft that is used by JetBlue right now is being changed. They're moving to the A220. So we did use that aircraft also in our future runway extensions. Thanks, Sarah. I hope it works too.
I'm not sure what that is. I apologize.
That's okay. That's very strange. Nobody's downstairs in your studio? Okay, we'll go with it. So again, it brings you back to the range that I was talking about. For the environmental assessment, we started to dig into the type of aircraft that we're utilizing the facility today, and then, of course, looking at the future aircraft to determine what is the true runway length that we most likely, realistically, would be looking at. So, for instance, for the Embraer 190, we know that their route right now, they fly to and from Hyannis to JFK and to LaGuardia. So we know what that distance is. So when we looked at the range that was provided in the airport master plan, we said, well, realistically, we know what this aircraft can do. It's already doing it. We know what the runway length realistically needs to be for that aircraft because it operates there now. Then we looked at the Gulfstream, who is a frequent flyer at the airport. What are their needs? The range that we see there is 1,500 nautical miles. That's, you know, a little bit more than what we would typically see, but that's in the range, that's in the realm of what we normally see for a distance for some of these aircraft. So we refined that length to account for that distance, that nautical mile distance. Same thing with the Global Express. We refined it a little bit further to get to a number that was more realistic with the nautical miles that they're typically flying. And then, of course, when we looked at the future commercial, the A220 and the A320, we identified that same route going from here to New York, which was realistic and something that was identified in our master plan as being something that would probably be something that we'd continue doing in the future. So this graphic here is basically just a graphic that's kind of explaining what that table just showed you. The red line is the existing runway length. The left-hand side are all the aircraft, the mixes or the family of aircraft that we talked about. In the middle is a very light yellow shade, and then on the right-hand side, that purple dotted line is the master plan analysis. We're coming in between that. So after further refinement, we said, the range that was provided in the master plan, we think we can hone into something that's less. This is, thanks. So JetBlue, they provided us with a letter in May 2nd, 2023, to reiterate their current plan to retire their fleet of E190s, bless you, to retire their fleet of E190s by 2026. And they have a firm order for 100 A220s. So in the runway length analysis, we accounted for that as part of our fleet mix. We accounted for that in our noise analysis that we did, so that information has already been accounted for both in the master plan and in the EA. So the master plan, what we did here for ease is to provide you with the alternatives that led up to the proposed alternative for the master plan. We kept them with the same nomenclature. So alternative 2 was one of the alternatives in the master plan that we looked at. It looked at a 6,950-foot runway with a 1,295-foot extension on the 15N that's closest to Independence Park. And then an extension of 400 feet on the 33N, which is closest to Yarmouth Road, Willow Street. Alternative 3 of the master plan was a runway length that was just less than that at 6,913 feet with 1,058 feet on the 15N Independence area and 400 feet on the 33N closest to Yarmouth Road and Willow Street. Alternative 4, which was the preferred alternative that the master plan suggested and that was pushed forward to this environmental assessment, was for a 6,550-foot runway with 895 feet on the 15N and 400 feet on the 33N. In looking at that as part of the EA and honing into some of the comments that we did receive as part of our January environmental notification form comments that we got from our community, some of the comments were, do we need all of that length? What alternative do you have to look at a runway that is of lesser length? Maybe a runway extension that doesn't even put any piece of pavement on the 33N. Can you still meet your purpose and need? So we started to look at that a little bit more deeply. So this modified alternative 4, we're calling it alternative 4A, has an 801-foot extension on the 15N, no extension on the 33N, and it has a displaced threshold on the 15N, and I'll explain that in a moment. The total length is at 6,054 feet. So the displaced threshold, it's something that airports have used. In fact, many airports around New England use displaced thresholds. It's a way to balance the needs of the airport from an operational standpoint, but also to look at the outside community, see what those impacts are. So when we started to look at alternatives, we said, we know we need runway length to accommodate our existing fleet, but how do we do it where we maintain all of the extension on airport property, and how do we do it to minimize the impacts to our community? Because we know that is a concern. Displaced threshold to do that. What a displaced threshold does, it allows for takeoff roll. So it gives a pilot extra pavement to be able to take off from the runway environment. But when that same pilot is landing at that airport, they cannot use that additional length that's been provided in the displacement. They can only use the area that's available after the threshold. That's why it's called a displaced threshold. So they can use the full 801 feet for their takeoff roll for departure from 15, but when they come in for an approach to 15, they cannot use that first 601 feet. What that does is it puts that aircraft essentially in almost the same location of its landing threshold today. So that means that although there is still an impact, because you can do the math, it's 200 feet, so that 200 feet difference means that the threshold moves by 200 feet, but the aircraft are basically landing 200 feet closer to where they are today. When we look at alternative 4B, Alternative 4B has a little bit bigger of an extension on the 15N, 895 feet. Again, no extension near Yarmouth Road and Willow Street, so no extension on the 33N. 695 feet of displacement on the 15N. Again, The total length, 6,148 feet, is what's being proposed. It uses those declared distances or that displaced threshold that allows for that takeoff roll to exist, but it very small impact in terms of where the threshold is today. Here's an alternative comparison for you. So the top one photograph is the existing runway at 5,253 feet. The alternative 4 was the master plan preferred alternative that was presented and brought forward as part of the environmental assessment. And alternative 4A is the 801 feet on the 15N with no extension on the 33N. And alternative 4B is the 895-foot extension on the 15N with nothing on the 33N. This is the preferred alternative that we are moving forward with as part of the environmental assessment. Noise analysis and our response to our community concerns. I do have some folks here from Epsilon. Ryan Callahan is with me today, so we'll be going through that. Ryan, if you wouldn't mind coming up and going over the noise piece and the noise contours, and I can step in and help out with any information. This will advance the slides. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. As Katie said, my name is Ryan Callahan. I'm a senior consultant at Epsilon, and my team and I completed a noise analysis for the existing conditions and some of the alternatives that Katie just spoke about. Before we dive into the details of the noise study, I just want to touch base a little bit about what decibels are, because we're going to be talking about decibels. So a decibel is a unit of sound level measurement. That's what we use to describe how loud or how quiet something is. Just like when we have a thermometer to measure temperature, we use Fahrenheit and Celsius for that. We use decibels to describe different sound levels. The human ear is a very sensitive instrument. We can hear things that are incredibly quiet. Like if I stop using this microphone, you can probably still tell I'm making sound. We can hear things that are as quiet as a mosquito buzzing next to our ear in the middle of the night. We can also hear things like a rock concert that are 100 decibels, 110 decibels. And the difference in sound energy between those two things I just described can be almost 1,000,000 times. So in order to put that into a scale, we can talk about, we have the decibel scale, and because of that, it is a logarithmic scale. So the math with decibels gets a little trickier than standard linear addition and subtraction. So this chart that we're looking at now is what we call a noise thermometer. It gives a few examples of different everyday indoor and outdoor activities and what those sound levels would be. If you're mowing your lawn, and you're on the lawnmower, that's in the 90s. If you're at a rock concert, like I said before, that could be over 100 decibels. And then in this room, when there's no sound at all, we're probably in the 30s. So now that we've learned a little bit about decibels, we're going to switch over to some different sound level metrics. Sound level metrics help us describe different sounds that may occur for longer or shorter periods of time and have different characteristics to them. So when we're talking about sound from an airport or sound from an aircraft, the main sound level metrics that we want to discuss today are the LEQ, the SEL, and the DNL. So an LEQ can be thought of simply as an average sound level. So over a given period of time, an LEQ is the average sound level that represents all of the sound that occurred over that time period. An SEL is a little more complicated. That is a specialty metric that normalizes sound into a 1-second time period. So when we have different aircraft, for example, that fly overhead and take a longer period of time for the sound event to stop, if you have a slow propeller plane that maybe takes 30, 40, 50 seconds from the time that you start first hearing it until the time that you can no longer hear it, it would take that sound level of all of that sound energy and compress it into a 1-second period. you could have a faster moving jet aircraft that may be louder, but the duration would be shorter. And the SEL gives us a way to compare those two different things in a way that is on a scale that makes sense. And finally, the DNL sound level metric. This is really the gold standard when it comes to evaluating sound from aircraft. This sound level metric is a 24-hour sound level, so it is a 24-hour average sound level, except that events that occur during the nighttime hours are penalized by 10 decibels. So what that means is if there is a flight that occurs between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., then before it gets put into the calculation to determine the resulting DNL, 10 decibels is added to that value, which is the same as essentially making one flight equal to 10 flights. The DNL is the standard noise metric that's used for all FAA studies, and it is the required metric for evaluating noise exposure and noise impacts on communities surrounding airports. Diving a little deeper into that, the DNL and the resulting contours of DNL are part of what's called Part 150. This essentially is a set of instructions that the FAA has provided for airport operators that choose to evaluate the sound from the airport. It gives them a set of instructions on how to evaluate that. One of the criteria is to use the DNL. Another criteria is you must use FAA's software, which is referred to as AEDT, which is the Aviation Environmental Design Tool. So the noise analyses that we conducted adhere to these requirements. We've used the Aviation Environmental Design Tool to calculate sound levels, both from individual aircraft to look at SEL sound levels, and then also the total DNL of all airport activities. So jumping back to that SEL that I was describing, we looked at 4 different aircraft that we understand are utilized frequently at the airport to see what the equivalent, the SEL, would be at communities both north and south of the airport. So we looked at a receptor in the Hyannis Park area, and we looked at a receptor in the Barnstable Village area. And on the screen, although it's a little tricky to read there, we have results here of the SEL, so remember that's a 1 second equivalent of these different aircraft in these different regions surrounding the airport. So the Embraer 190 using runway 15 in the Hyannis Park area came in at 85 decibels. Going the other way, Barnstable Village is a 71. And if you go vertically down, keeping the runway consistent amongst the 4 different aircraft, you can see that those values are different, which allows us to correlate and see which aircraft essentially are causing more or less sound. This is a visual representation of what we just spoke about. So this is just the Cessna 402 taking off from left to right. And you can see visually what those sound levels on an SEL basis, so a 1 second basis, what that would be in the surrounding communities. And then if I go to the next slide, this is simply the same aircraft taking off in the opposite direction. So you can see how the contours vary depending on which way the aircraft is going. Moving on to the DNL contours, we looked at a couple different comparisons. This first one is the build versus no build condition. And that's looking out ahead using data that the airport provided for build versus no build. And this resulting DNL contour that we're seeing here, the area that we want to focus on are the yellow contours. The yellow contour is the 65 decibel level. The FAA considers areas within a 65 decibel DNL to be an impacted area. So areas outside of that DNL are not considered to be impacted per the FAA requirements. The important part of this figure is showing the difference that's occurring at the area of the runway extension. So the only real difference here when the runway is extended happens, as you would expect, right in the immediate area of the runway. That's what the circled area is. And then if I go to the next one, that area is blown up so we can actually see it. Very nice. So that area where the runway extension is occurring, we're showing a solid area here and then lines. So if we go back, the future condition build is the solid line and the no build is the shaded area. So you can see here where the lines depart from their corresponding shaded areas. That's where the change in a DNL sound would be occurring between the build and no build condition. Thank you.
I am very short. Next, we will have Bob Mallard with Airport Solutions Group that is going to provide some animation that identifies various aircraft that we use, and Bob's going to go through a list in a moment, some of the criteria that we use to identify these aircraft. But what we'd like to show you is an actual aircraft that's departing our airport and the existing configuration, and what that same aircraft, if we use the same type of aircraft with the extended runway, where that aircraft would be over the same location as the existing when they depart. So Bob, do you want to proceed from there? Is that where you want to? Okay. So Bob, I'm going to put these in case I forgot to mention anything. I think there's just 5, right? Yeah. So, Bob, if you wouldn't mind, I know you can put your microphone on over there. If you could kind of go through the animation notes so everybody understands the process that we took to show you this animation. Obviously, we know that certain things could change the animation, but let's have Bob walk through that real quick.
Sure. Can you hear me, Katie?
Yep.
Just in anticipation of completing this task, how do I get to the hard drive to
I will do that for
do
you.
that? Okay, perfect. Okay, so as Katie mentioned, she asked my company to see if we could try to animate.
You're not tall
If we could try to animate some of the things going on here, some takeoff and landings, and she wanted to use real flight data. And she had mentioned earlier about a vector system that the airport has embarked on, or has been using, I should say, and it's a flight tracking system, very much like FlightAware, Flight Radar 24, things you can get online. So the animations you're going to see in a minute represent actual flights captured by that flight tracking system, and you'll see the flight number, you'll know what the aircraft is, you'll know what day they flew on, and Katie wanted that to show that they're keeping track of this information, and we didn't want to make anything up. We wanted to show real flights. Now there's a lot of information in there, and we decided to look at specific aircraft, and how we decided upon that was we looked at the master plan, and we looked at the total operations of aircraft in the master plan, and out of the most active type of aircraft using the airport, we identified which one are the noisiest, the loudest. And the first thing we did was identify through DBA, measure DBA, which is decibels. We had a source from the FAA, you can see in number 1 on where to get that information. So we looked at the aircraft that are using the facility, we looked at the most operations, and then homed in on those. And out of the ones that we could get noise information, we made a list of which one are the noisiest. And they happen to be the Embraer E190, that is the aircraft that JetBlue flies, that was the noisiest that we could find. The Challenger 600 is a corporate aircraft. The Cessna 402, and the Cirrus SR-22. So of the 16 aircraft we looked at, those are the 4 noisiest. And so we decided to home in on using those. Now, we do have animations of all 4, but we decided in the interest of time to focus on the Embraer E190 and the Cessna 402. If you see number 3, I mentioned before, the animations you're going to see in a minute are based on actual flight data. So the location and elevation of those are real data that we had traced with radar hits from the flight tracking system. Number 4 just simply, states the obvious, which is this is a point in time. It's one data element of a database full of a lot of information in there, a lot of different flights. We just randomly picked the aircraft we needed and a flight for that. We didn't go on any particular day. We didn't look for anything in particular. We just said, okay, let's find the E190, let's find the 402, and let's try to get something that's fairly current, that had information in there. So that's what we did. I will say that it probably goes without saying, though, that the one flight we chose for any particular aircraft is one flight. That same aircraft, even the same pilot flying the same aircraft, may fly it differently. It's totally up to the pilot how they fly. Generally speaking, as a pilot, you take off with full thrust and you want to gain altitude as quickly as possible. That is the goal. And so that's what you do on takeoff. On landing, it's quite the opposite. You pull your throttle back and you're landing with less power, but you're a much lower descent angle. The angle of ascent is greater than the angle of descent. And much like note number 4, number 5 is basically the pilot will decide, based on all sorts of performance criteria, at what point on the runway will the aircraft actually leave the pavement. It's a factor of many things, including the condition of the runway, aircraft performance, temperature is a big thing. Aircraft may use a slightly longer runway in the summertime when the air is hot and thin versus in the wintertime when it's cool and there's more bite to, say, a propeller. That's generally true. So with that, we're going to go to the first animation, which I believe is an example of a real aircraft flight from JetBlue. And I don't recall, I want to say it's in 2022, but the date will be on the... Number one, yeah. So pause this as soon as it starts playing, Katie. I just want to take... Okay, perfect. So just this applies to the next video as well and a future animation. Just to orient yourself, the lower left-hand corner is a Google Earth image of the airport and the extended runway 33 approach. The aircraft is clearly oversized. It's just, we've done that for demonstration purposes so people in the audience can see what's going on. But in this particular case, an E190, a JetBlue Embraer 190, is taking off on runway 15 on August 15th, 2022. It's flight number 1963. And it will rotate at some point on the runway and start to climb, and it's going to go out in roughly in the extended approach of runway 33. Now, the information in the upper left is information that the airport had asked us to try to include in the animation. And obviously, the first line is the flight number. It's a real flight from Hyannis to JFK using the E190. The where it says feet, it says 0 feet. That's because the aircraft is on the ground right now. When Katie hits play, you're going to see the aircraft move, and it'll get partially down the runway. And you're going to see the first thing you're going to see change is you're going to see you're going to see elapsed time. So the time starts as soon as the aircraft starts moving. The next thing you'll see change is the elevation above ground, and that's when you start seeing that number climb. And you're going to see the number climb before the aircraft even leaves the runway environment, let alone the airport. And that's because it's rotated, wheels are up, and it's starting to climb. And then the distance, where it says 0 miles from HYA, HYA is the airport identifier for the Cape Cod Gateway Airport, it will start counting as soon as it hits the runway end, the physical end of 33. So if you keep your eye on those and kind of go up and down, you'll be able to see exactly what elevation that aircraft is at any particular time. Now, the bigger image in the background is a profile of this same flight. The green dot in the lower right-hand corner is essentially where you would be sitting in a boat, perhaps, off the coast observing all of this. If you were in the boat, that's where you would be off the coast, and you'd be looking left where the vertical line is. That's where the aircraft is sitting right now on the airport. And then as the aircraft takes off, it's going to get closer to you. And as the aircraft passes by that dot, that will be essentially 90 degrees, like a normal profile would look. But this is our best attempt at trying to show the entire flight from left to right. So go ahead, Katie, you can hit play. And right now I'm watching the aircraft take off. And in a minute, you're going to see the feet starting to climb. And that's where the aircraft leaves the runway. Right now. So here it is, the aircraft. As it passes the intersection, it's about 200 feet. As it passes the end of the runway, it's about 300 feet. As it leaves the airport, it's about 400 feet. In this case, the aircraft is banked left a little bit, and it will continue on in that direction. And again, this is a JetBlue aircraft flying to JFK in New York. So this is just one example. They don't all fly that route. They may fly straight out. Frankly, I'm not sure why it went in this direction, but I'm quite certain that if we were to look at 100 of these, they'd probably be slightly different. So you can see it's passing by the observer right now, and it's at elevation roughly 1,500 feet above the ground. So it's going to end in a second. That I don't know. We are not noise people. She asked my company to simply try to animate real flight tracking data. You'd have to ask the noise experts on that.
So we can go back to the SEL table that we showed, which we have a JetBlue flight. This particular flight, we don't know what that decibel level was for that flight. We didn't calculate that. But we can go back to the table to see sound exposure level, indicative levels for this type of aircraft.
Where was the observer as, that looks like High Spot, where was the observer located?
That green dot was just a presumed location. There wasn't somebody out there taking a camera. No, no.
So right, that's the perspective. So is this number 2, Katie? Yep. Okay, so this is a similar type of animation. This is a similar type of animation using a Cessna 402. And you can hit play, Katie. So everything I said about the numbers at the top are the same. You can see the green dot. That's the perspective you're looking at right now if you were to be able to see the aircraft the entire time. So the aircraft rotates. Right now, as it crosses the intersection of the runway, this aircraft is about 180 feet above ground. It hits the end of the runway, it's about 280. As it leaves the airport, it's about 400 feet, plus or minus, above the ground. And this one is going to fly fairly straight out in the approach. And you can see the flight path, and both in the horizontal and vertical scales, that is real flight data based on real radar hits. We traced all of that information to get this plan and profile. You can see it's banking slightly right. It's approaching 90 degrees to the observer, and right now it's about 870 feet above the ground, a little bit lower than and there's about 900 feet as it passes by, lower than the E190, obviously. So there's a reason we did those two animations. The airport asked us to do it, and then we tweaked it a little bit. But ultimately, the goal of this is to try to conceptually animate what impact the extension at the 1.5 end would have for people in the 3.3 approach. This next animation, which I'll have Katie run in a second, is basically like a stick figure type cartoon, so to speak, to simply show what happens when you extend a runway. And as a pilot myself, I was always taught to get to V1 speed with full throttle, and you want to rotate the aircraft, leave the pavement, and climb as fast as you can obviously safely as fast as you can, but altitude is always your friend. And so you try to gain altitude fairly quickly under full power. Landing, as I mentioned before, is just the opposite. You throttle back and your angle of descent is much shallower. So in this case, go ahead, Katie, you can hit play. You're going to see just a kind of a cartoon, so to speak, of an aircraft rotating wherever that point may be. And on its angle of ascent, it'll be at a certain height over that house. With an extension, the pilot would use the same takeoff run, rotate generally at the same distance, and assuming everything else is the same, they would be higher over that same point anywhere in the approach. And that is the only purpose, really, of this animation is to show you that it's in the pilot's best interest to get up to speed, rotate the aircraft, and climb as fast and safely as possible. They're not going to use more runway than they need. And the extension on the 1.5 end would actually have an interesting benefit to those folks on the 3.3 approach. As you can see, the aircraft would technically be higher. Now, at any given time, any pilot is going to fly that, that course however they feel. And it's impacted, as I mentioned earlier, by temperature, by runway contamination, by all sorts of factors. But theoretically, under ideal conditions and the same similar conditions, this is what would happen. So now what I want to do is apply the same principle to the images we saw earlier, or the videos, animations we saw earlier. Now, this is a case of the JetBlue on airport, and go ahead, Katie, you can hit play. So this is essentially just like that last stick figure cartoon type animation, just using the Barnstable, the Cape Cod Gateway Airport. Now, we trace this precisely based on radar hits. So that is the location where the aircraft, in this case a JetBlue E-190, rotated. And this is its flight path as it leaves the airport. In a minute, you're going to see a simulated departure for a theoretical runway extension of 895 feet. And you'll see what that means, what that does for the folks in the 3.3 approach. It's going to rotate before that right line, as you see right there. And, I should not overstate the impact. It's not a huge impact, but it is a slightly higher aircraft, theoretically, with an extension than it otherwise would be. 61 feet is not all that great, but that's what would happen. Now, we're going to show one for the 402, the same aircraft we showed earlier. Yes. And these last two, this one here and the one just before, were based on real flights. In this case, this 402 was a real flight tracked by the airport's aircraft tracking system, and the flight occurred on April 4th of this year using the 402. So the location where it says rotation, that is the location as best we could tell from the flight radar tracking information on where it left the ground and started its climb. And this would be a simulated with a, proposed runway extension at the 1.5 end. So quite similarly, it would rotate a little further north, in this case, a little further left. And as we compare the two, we've calculated the difference in elevation. And the difference in elevation is going to be completely dependent on the actual vertical flight track of the aircraft. So you saw the E-190 was roughly 60 plus or minus feet, and this for that one flight, and this 402 was about 90, 89. So this is a plan and profile with a 402 showing the entire approach. And what's going to happen is when Katie hits play, in this case, for the interest of time, we're showing both the existing runway end and a theoretical simulated departure with an extension and what the difference in elevations would be. And again, this is a real flight on April 4th from Cape Air. You can see the, there we go. So the current runway end, it just started. So the two numbers counting up are just the elevations above ground for those aircraft, and obviously the difference in elevation. It's not great, but this is This is the difference in the different flight tracks with the existing runway end versus a proposed extension. And forgive me, I forgot to put the green dot on this plan, but it is in the exact same spot down at the lower right-hand corner. So it's approaching 90 degrees, which is a typical profile. And I believe it stays roughly 90-foot elevation difference. The point being that the extension would give a theoretical slightly higher aircraft. And as the aircraft moves, it's generating noise naturally, and the noise would generate from the aircraft itself. So the final animation I have is a plan and profile. The plan view is in the upper left-hand corner. The colored lines you see were taken from the master plan. Those are the DNL contours from the master plan itself. And what you're going to see in a second as soon as she hits play is basically the same color scheme surrounding the aircraft. So if you were to, since the aircraft generates noise, if you were to suspend that aircraft in the air, whether it flew or not, you would hear noise all around. And this is a graphical representation of what you would, perhaps hear, whether you're below the aircraft, above the aircraft, left or right. Now, obviously, there's a lot of things affecting noise, not the least of which is wind and other factors. Terrain may affect it. In this case, the Cape in this particular area is relatively flat, so there's not a lot of terrain issues here, but there's all sorts of impacts to noise. But this, again, is just an attempt to show how the noise surrounds the aircraft, and as the aircraft climbs, that source gets further away from folks on the ground. So the aircraft just rotated. It's off the ground. And this is based on, this particular flight is based on the existing runway end. And this is an E190? Yes, that's true. This is an example of an E190. In a minute, you're going to see the upper left-hand corner switch, and it's going to go to the extension. So you're going to see that fade out and another one fade in. There you go. It was quick. So we kept the flight path of the existing real runway departure there, and now this would be a theoretical simulated departure if the runway were extended. And we just chose yellow, but it stands to reason no matter how far away you are or what metric you choose, the aircraft we know would theoretically be higher over the same given point, and a higher aircraft means perhaps less noise to someone on the ground.
May I ask a question about the DNL for that piece you just presented? Is that the 24-hour average of the single event? We're looking at the average, correct?
The last slide was the average, the DNL.
That includes night when it's quiet? Exactly. Yes. Okay. Because we'd be red right where we are if it weren't actual. Is my
Okay. Thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. Hopefully that helped some of you visualize the differences. You have a question?
Yeah, I have a question, Katie. Do you have an example of the impact of the extended runway for arrivals? You showed the patches. How about arrivals?
For arrivals to 1-5? From we don't have animations for those, but we can possibly get those put together. Huh? Right, but just to show what the arrivals would be with the 200 feet. It's a 200-foot difference is what we're, just over 200 feet.
Katie, just to jump in, I think what Karen is getting at is we're in the direct flight path, and what we do notice is with the slower, lower approach, our noise impact is significantly greater than on a takeoff, which we've seen up there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of our concerns, and you can answer this later if that's more appropriate, is the source data that's going into these DNLs. Is it based on actual testing events, or is it based on some information the FAA has given you on historical averages based on specific aircraft?
So I'm going to ask Ryan to help me with this answer, if you wouldn't mind. Ryan, if you have a response to that for me.
Good question. So the AEDT model, which is the FAA's model, has a catalog of all of the aircraft, and it has built into that the sound levels of that aircraft. So they have a certification process for aircraft, which are designated by different stages. And as part of that certification, there's a bunch of sound level measurements that are taken around each of these aircraft, and that's essentially back calculated into a value that is in the model. The model has different sound levels for takeoff and for ascent and descent. It has different stages built into it so that it inherently is doing those calculations in the background, because of course planes aren't always the same sound level. But the important thing with the DNL is to recognize that it is a 24-hour sound level. So when we talk about a plane flying over your head, of course that if we'd had one plane fly over your head and nothing else happened for the other 23 hours and 59 minutes in the day, that would be a very small DNL level, whereas as the plane flies over, it has a much higher sound level impact in the 70s, 80s, even 90s.
Can I ask one follow-on? Is it based on existing traffic, the DNLs, or is it, what is the source? So we're looking at, on runway 1533, X number of Embraer landings and takeoffs on any given day. And is that just based on the current 2 flights that JetBlue is doing, or is it based on a projection of they might have 6 daily flights?
Sure. So the DNL calculation includes all of the aircraft that take off and land at the airport for the entire year. So we get an entire year's worth of data that's broken out by individual aircraft, by which runway they used, and by what time of the day or night they took off or landed. So all of that gets fed into the model, which is it's quite a bit of things to input and then get some lines out, right? But that's the process. Everything that occurs at the airport throughout the entire year goes in, and that becomes an annualized value that then gets turned into a 24-hour DNL sound level.
So that gets watered down, is what you're saying. Because in the winter, you're putting those 24 hours that have minimal flights in the same category as the summer, where it's happening all the time, and you're saying the average of that.
That is the process. It's a 24-hour average value.
360.
Annualized value, correct. Yep.
So really, it's watered down, is what you're telling me.
Ryan, may I just ask one more? So is this
Sure.
based on 22 actual numbers, the DNLs we saw today, or is it a different year?
Yeah. These are the current, and then the build is the 2040 values. So we have projected future versus existing real current values.
We're going to hold the rest of the questions until the end. We're almost done with the presentation. Thank you very much, Ryan.
Excuse me, point of order, please, Ms. Servos.
Yes?
I think these people should be allowed to answer questions now. Ask and answer questions because we're on this subject, and if we wait till the end, we're going to have to go back to the screen, and I think now's the time to get some questions. We've been here for an hour and 20 minutes now. We'd like to ask some questions, please. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. If we can get the lights put back on real quick. And we would also like to have people sign up if Ashley and Will, if you can assist us for the questions. And then I'll ask Alyssa to join me up here so we can answer any questions that may come up. Thank you.
Where do we sign up?
Please make sure when you come to the podium that you state your name and/or affiliation, who you're representing, or the community you're representing. Thank you. I think it is. You were the first one to come up.
Name is Richard Carroll. I live at 61 Moorshop Avenue in Barnstable Village. The simulation you've shown is straight out over Yarmouth, over Lewis Bay, if I'm correct, at a gradual, not zero, but very minimal change in ground level. My concerns are the takeoff and landings over Barnstable Village. You've got elevation changes going up over Moorshop, up by the water tank. And you are also showing it as a straight-out approach from the runway. The pilots from Cape Air and the new Gulf, I believe it's Gulf Air, do not go straight out. They get over the end of the runway and they cut hard, they cut to the right, coming up over the village, and they're full throttle. Changes are made by weight load, in noise, and things like that. Your simulations don't cover these issues at all. Plus, at the end of that runway, coming over towards Barnstable Village, you've just put in probably about 500 units of housing directly in line with the runway. And I believe there's another 350 units of housing going in. That's somewhere in the proximity of 1,500 to 2,000 souls that are going to be impacted. They're not even living there yet. So we're representing them. No reference has been made to any of this. And the elevation changes going up over Barnstable Village, I'd be willing to bet they come out, they cut hard, they go right over the water tank, the Barnstable Village water tank, over the courthouse. Coming in at night, they pick the light out at the neck, come right across the village, and they come right up Finney's Lane, Barnstable Road, Finney's Lane, straight in. And they're not at 300 feet, I don't care. What your simulations show, they're not there. And now you want to increase the runway, bring in bigger aircraft, more noise, and whenever we complain about this, we get the service from the airport, we have no control over that. Why in God's name would we want to increase the use of an airport that you have no control over? Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Oh, I'm already on the list.
Okay, I think we're going in order, is what you said.
Well, I'm over in the other one, I'm third. Oh, I signed the wrong list. Well, I got a whole bunch of questions. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Jane Quinn, and I live on 107 Baxter Ave, and I'm with a Highland Park. And, sorry, the energy, I'm so frustrated, I can't even stand it. Many of the things that you showed us tonight I don't want to call them, I won't call them lies, so maybe falsehoods that have been fed to us. It's staggering. The flights, as the first gentleman said, are much lower than the examples you've shown. We've looked at them, we've eyed them. They're 200 feet above our houses. I mean, it's appalling, it's scary. The decibel levels are very skewed also. My daughter-in-law is an audiologist. She works down at Duke Medical, and she sent me a chart to say what the decibel levels should be. And if you're exposed to a decibel level of 100 in 15 minutes in the course of a day, so that's 5 planes for us, just 1 minute of it, which we of course know it's longer, that starts permanent hearing damage. If we do it for 30 minutes, then it's less because it's spread out if they are higher. And this is only if they're going 650 feet above us. They are so loud. I offered last time, and every time I've been here, come sit on my deck. Come sit and listen to it. You will never, ever, ever be able to say that it's the decibel level. You have watered it down so much that it's almost laughable if it wasn't affecting all of us in these neighborhoods, many neighborhoods. Our hearing is going to be shot. I have to wear earplugs if I want to be outside. And sometimes if I have the windows open, I have to wear earplugs inside. We have to shut off the TV or put it on pause. We can't listen to conversations. We can't have them. We can't have them outside when a plane goes over. So don't tell us that we're not being affected and it's only this much. It's so watered down. And the summer months are so much more dangerous, as you've alluded to already, that we have more planes. And they fly. You can say that there's a time limit. We've checked it. We've written it down. Some have started at 5 in the morning, and some have gone past midnight. So this is absurd. We're being affected, and for the amount of people that I have a graph here that says how much for the busiest domestic routes for the airport. It says passengers, and this is between November 21 till October 22. To Martha's Vineyard, only 500 people. These are passengers, these are not flights that they have recorded. So that means if someone's going out there, they probably have to come back. Or if they've come in, they have to go back. 500 people. To Boston, 2,000. So let's say it's even 2,000. We have in this room, in our neighborhoods, much more than 2,000 people or 2,500 people that are affected by this. And you're trying to make a profit, and you're saying it's good for our neighborhood and it's good for Cape Cod? It is not. It's good for people that have a huge mansion out here and come out once a year for maybe a week, but it's not good for the communities. And you should be representing the communities, not this people. I'm sorry you're not making a profit. That should tell you something. People don't use the airport for a reason. Sorry, I'm just extremely frustrated. So, and the pilots fly any way they want. And to your, even you said it last time or 2 meetings ago, it's up to them to decide where. They should have a course where they have to go. They can't just decide to fly over Rachel's house one day and fly over your house one day and fly over and come back whichever way you want to. That's not okay. Anyway, I'm very frustrated, and I don't think you're looking out for the community. I think you're looking out for the bottom line, and that's not what we should be about. That's not what Cape Cod, the community, is about. Maybe you want to do it for summer rentals, but they're not the ones that are living through this, because nobody will rent in our area. Thank you.
Vita Morris, Yarmouth Port. I have a question and a comment. those of us who are living in the descent area have noticed that there seems to be less traffic right now than in previous years. Is it true that you're having fewer flights coming in? Well, that doesn't seem to bode very well for your.
Just for this summer that you're noticing?
No, well, it always is much less in the winter time. But then we would see the major increase.
Are you in Hyannis Park, or where are you?
No,
located?
I'm in Yarmouthport.
You're in
It's in the
Yarmouthport.
final descent area.
We have construction that's occurring on one of our runways, so it's been closed down for that construction. So you're probably not seeing the flight activity because of that.
Okay, there definitely seemed to be much less activity. Okay, now the comment. I think it was in late April or early May, a gentleman came into a town council meeting in this room and made a suggestion that this whole project be rethought and that the airport activities be moved to Otis Air Force Base, which then would free up the space at the airport for, he gave some examples of what has happened in airports that have been closed, and he used Stapleton in Denver as one where they put together a beautiful multi-use housing project, in other words. And the other one where they had some housing and maybe more park area was in the historic Tempelhof Airport in Berlin. Then he used the Charleston Airport, which apparently moved into one of their many military facilities, because that's like an area that's has always had many military installations, and that seems to have worked very, very well from that standpoint. In other words, at using the instead of having a private airport, having the facility use the Charleston Air Force Base or something like that over there. And I think it's a brilliant solution to this whole problem. And what he presented was then written up as in the Cape Cod Times as an op-ed piece by a councilwoman of this town who happens to be a pilot also. So I think that's something for you to consider carefully. Thank you.
Dan Bello.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dan Bello. My wife and I, we live kind of between the West Hyannis Port and Hyannis sections of town. And, we're not quite in the flight path, but, the flight path's, kind of over there a little bit, but it definitely affects us, but seems like not as much as some other people in the room. But I think the person in the back corner there, her point was very important as far as the descending has not been analyzed or not presented here at all. And we find, like the descending, they're much lower, obviously. They're much lower when they're coming near our house. And the sound is not, let's say, however many decibels. But when the planes take off, they're definitely higher when they go over our house, but they're obviously much louder. But they're higher, so we find the effect, the negative noise effect is definitely greater from the descending airplanes, and that hasn't been addressed here at all. So I think that's very important to address that, okay? So, I guess the other question is, well, that's a comment. The other question is, I know JetBlue is going from the 190s to the 220s. Just judging by the number, it seems like it's a bigger aircraft. I don't know. And is it a bigger aircraft and is it a louder aircraft than the 190?
So for the aircraft, for the seating capacity, I believe it increases from 100 passengers to 110. Is that correct, Matt? 120 passengers. I don't know the noise signature of that aircraft. We can find out. The E190 of our mix of aircraft that Bob looked at was the loudest aircraft of the top 10 operating at the airport, or the top 20, I should say, operating at the airport. Obviously, with the E190 going away, the A220 is actually a quieter aircraft, so the noise signature is a bit different. I just don't know off the top of my head exactly what it is. We can.
So I was just telling Katie that we did animate a few arrivals, and again, every flight that was chosen was randomly chosen. We don't know where they're flying, how often they're flying, and whose neighborhood they may be going over. We just simply looked for those type of aircraft and picked them from a long list. I don't doubt at all that there are probably dozens or more, hundreds of other flights using the same aircraft that may go in different paths and different elevations. But what we can show you is a few arrivals, both at the 1.5 end and the 3.3 end, and you'll be able to see the path it took and the height above ground that it was, and it's real flight data based on radar hits. So if, Katie, if you go to...
This is for 1.5.
So this is a JetBlue flight on June 2nd, arriving runway 15. Yeah, Katie, you want to shut the lights off maybe, or? So in this case, you can see the aircraft in the lower left-hand corner. It's a plan and profile, and you'll see the location of the aircraft, you know, to the general area, I guess. It's looks like it's on centerline to me. It's 1.89 miles out, and it's 548 feet above ground. Clearly, as I had mentioned earlier, on arrival, they're coming in at a shallower descent and lower power than they would be on takeoff. They're climbing higher and faster on takeoff. So this is an example of a real flight on June 2nd with a JetBlue arriving runway 15 over Route 6. So this is approaching 1 mile from the airport, and its elevation looks like 350 plus or minus. If that aircraft were taking off, once it gets 1 mile away, I'm quite sure it will be higher on takeoff. So it crossed over the airport property line. It's getting to the end of runway 15, and in a second it's going to touch down right now. And generally speaking, I wouldn't expect anyone other than the airport people in the room to know what the markings are, but there are markings on a runway like this. They're called aiming points. They used to be called fixed distance markers, and they are identify 1,000 feet down the runway, which is the point at which the visual markings on a runway are telling a pilot that's where you should exactly. Katie is circling it right now. That marking right there is theoretically where the pilot would try to hit, so to speak. So you can go to the next one, which one is this? Okay, so JetBlue arriving on 3.3. And again, can you pause it right here, Katie? Actually, drag it back a little bit if you can. So just to before you leave the screen, you can see at this point right here, they're just under 500 feet above the ground. As we saw in a previous animation based on real flight data, an aircraft taking off on 15 when they hit this point is probably close to 1,500 feet. And this was my point. They're climbing faster at a higher rate of ascent on takeoff under full power versus landing. It's a much shallower glide slope, so they are lower to the ground. This flight was on August 17th of 2022, E190, JetBlue. So you can see it's, I mean, this is real radar hit data. And you can see the distance and elevation.
So what are the dimensions of this room to give a sense of what 100 to 200 feet look like?
I don't know that. We have more, but that's fine. I mean, that just.
Yes, yes, we do. Sorry. Paul Phelan?
First time anyone's pronounced my name right, thank you, actually. She stated my name already. I'm a resident of Centerville. Quick survey, who has flown out of the airport? Raise your hand. I'm impressed. One thing that, I'll say, we know the airport services the wealthy and the connected. That's a given in this industry. I don't know a single person that has a plane. They claim that there's 40 planes based there. When every time I drive by there, I've yet to see more than 20. Maybe they're out on flights. One thing that is neglected to be stated here is that airport travel is the worst form of transportation for our environment. This gentleman didn't mention that planes taking off use a gallon of aviation fuel a second. I don't know what these JetBlue planes do, but they're at least a gallon a second because of their engines. They're hoping to bring wide-body engines, planes in here, incidentally, and they have no commitment from JetBlue. They have a letter that's stating, yes, we need the runway, but Ms. Zervos was quoted in the Cape Cod Times recently. Stating it would be interesting to bring a large, it would be interested in bringing a larger fleet of jets to the Cape. A longer runway would also allow corporate planes to take off with more weight. But folks, we keep hearing about corporate planes and commercial. The Cape economy, the backbone is the small business. I don't know how many corporations we have here on the Cape. Big thing left out here is of all the alternatives, of all the runways presented tonight, the runway, we have two 1,000-foot runways, folks, to the 10 miles to the west. It's at Joint Base Cape Cod. And I'd like to know why Ms. Zervos and the Airport Commissioners will not take a look at moving the operation there. It blows my mind, to be frank with you. We don't need to spend $25 million out on these beautiful 650 acres. We can move the whole operation out there, and they're set up for it. They'll welcome any more commercial or private jets out there. That concludes it, folks. Thank you very much. And I'll just like to add, we're not going to get anywhere with the Airport Commission or the airport management tonight or ever. We need to continue be in contact with our politicians, elected officials, the FAA, and the Department of Master DOT has an aeronautical division also. We need to hire a lawyer because they have lawyers. Thank you all very much.
Chris P.
Hi, and thank you. Chris Powicki, I'm the chair of Sierra Club's Cape Cod and Islands Group, and I'm speaking here tonight representing more than 100,000 Sierra Club members and supporters across the state. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the environmental review of the airport's master plan. PFAS-containing firefighting foams used at and around the airport have contaminated the Cape's sole source aquifer, nearby water supply wells, and ponds and creeks in neighboring areas of Barnstable and Yarmouth. These foams are commonly referred to as AFFS. Due to AFF use, tens of thousands of Cape Codders living in these areas were unknowingly exposed to high PFAS levels in drinking water for years with unknown health impacts. PFAS removal systems currently ensure that the safety of our public water supplies, but heavily contaminated soil and groundwater at the airport and at the property next door, the site of the former Barnstable County Fire Training Academy, pose continuing exposure and health risks. Many neighborhoods subject to past exposures are now designated as environmental justice communities, meriting additional protections under state law. For the airport master plan, the Secretary's certificate under MEPA included a specific requirement that the DEIR address past and possible future environmental burdens imposed on state-designated EJ communities that surround the airport. It is disappointing there's been no mention of environmental justice communities during this meeting. The latest scientific findings published in the peer-reviewed literature by Rule et al. From Harvard University and quoted in a June 13 letter from the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection are of direct relevance here, even though they address AFFF contamination at the Joint Base Cape Cod. Here's a quote from that study embedded in DEP's letter. This study highlights the potential for elevated PFAS exposures downstream from AFFF source zones to persist for centuries. Since chemical transport is comparatively rapid on Cape Cod, other AFFF sites may experience even longer periods of elevated PFAS concentrations or elevated PFAS exposures. The combined effect of surface activity and sorption of PFAS to solids means most releases of AFFF contaminated sites are retained in the VADOS zone. This implies that remediation of the VADOS zone is needed to protect long-term or to prevent long-term contamination. Otherwise, groundwater contamination would need to be captured and treated for centuries to limit deleterious downstream exposures. Based on these findings, Mass DEP has required the responsible JBCC entity to conduct and report out the results of an assessment of groundwater extraction, treatment, and reinjection/infiltration remedial alternatives for the AFFF source area. Sierra Club joins community groups in wanting to ensure that the airport's planned upgrades and expansions feature a comprehensive long-term solution to the PFAS problems in and around Hyannis, involving the removal and remediation of these dangerous forever chemicals at the source, not just at downstream water supply wells. Otherwise, the airport's soil and groundwater have potential to threaten the Cape's aquifer and nearby EJ communities, citizens, and ecosystems for centuries to come. Thank you for addressing these concerns and ensuring that remedial alternatives are included in the DEIR. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I just wanted to comment on the PFAS piece. We have done extensive research on PFAS and what the airport has done to mitigate for our PFAS. So we do have on our website, if you go to the About the Airport information, thank you, Matt, and you scroll down to nearly the bottom, it's right underneath the environmental assessment page. It tells all of the studies that we've done on PFAS and how we're rectifying PFAS. We've mitigated our 2 sites. Of the airport, we have about 639 acres on the airport. Just over 2 acres were identified as having PFAS in the soil associated with firefighting foams. We've mitigated those 2 spots. We're monitoring them as we're required to monitor by DEP standards. We report on those monitoring efforts every twice a year, once in October and once in April. We will continue to follow that. We've modeled our PFAS plume, so we've also been able to fingerprint our PFAS, so we know what is our PFAS versus other industrial sites that are north of the airport's facility, not associated with the airport. So we were able to fingerprint our PFAS so we can follow our plume. Right now, the plume is headed towards the Maher wells. The Maher wells have treated for PFAS. They have a filtration system that's in place. We know that our plume isn't quite there yet. It will transition to that location. We're working with DPW for a final mitigation for that to assist with the filtration system that they've already put in place, and that's been approved as a course of action for mitigation by DEP. So we did have a public meeting in September. We opened up our doors to, we had some residents from Hyannis Park Civic Association as well as Barnstable Village to talk about PFAS and just give them some background information. We plan on doing that again, so if you're interested, please make sure that you have contact information with us, and we'll make sure that you're at that next meeting so you can see what we're doing. Thank you.
Can you just clarify whether you're actually treating and removing the PFAS at the source at the airport, or are you just capping it and leaving there?
So we have capped the 2 sources. They were associated with our annual testing that we had to do in our firefighting trucks. Unfortunately, the PFAS that's in the firefighting foam at the time is the only firefighting foam that's approved by the FAA for use, and they had certain parameters for us to test it every year to make sure that the proportion between water and foam met the requirement for fighting a fire. So we've instituted, This is a little bit longer than what we want to go over today, but we can certainly cover this in a future meeting just on PFAS. So I'm just going to go through this quick so you can see. We're the first airport in Massachusetts to purchase an ecologic cart. It's a unit that connects directly to the fire truck that will test our firefighting foam to make sure it meets FAA standards for foam to water mixture. Prior to this, we had to spray it on the ground and test it and see what that proportion was. We don't do that anymore, and we haven't done that since 2016. But we were the first one to purchase it before it was even approved by the FAA for use, because we said, look, we've got to, obviously we know we have an issue and we're addressing it. We've taken a number of soil samples. This graphic is very hard to see. It's easier to see on our PFAS page, but it shows where our plume is, where we've tested in the 2 sites that have been mitigated for. These are our 2 sites on the property that we've capped. But we know that even though we've capped them, there is still PFAS that is embedded in the soil underneath that, and there's still PFAS that's in the groundwater. So that's why we're following the plume. We've been able to fingerprint our PFAS, so we know what is airport and what is not airport. And we're tracking that, and through hydrology modeling, we've been able to model where that plume is going and where it will eventually get to the Maher wells. Because the Maher wells are already treating for PFAS and they already have a filtration system in place that's approved by DEP, that is enough for our mitigation efforts to assist them in that filtration system that they already have in place. Otherwise, because where our plume is right now, there's no logical place for us to put a curtain wall or anything like that to address or collect PFAS. It makes more sense, and through discussions with DEP, to go in the direction that we're going, which is to allow the Maher wells to do their work through their filtration system, and we are assisting them monetarily for that because they've had to put that in order to help with, to make sure that drinking water was appropriate. But all of that information is available on our website, and then we can have a further meeting at some other point in time, a public meeting on PFAS.
Donna O.
Hi, my name is Donna Orth from Hyannis, and I came out of not only noise concerns, but chiefly for environmental concerns. And I think that in this day and age, with all that we've learned about, you know, how we have so many unresolved environmental concerns about impacts, all kinds of impacts on our aquifer, our brooks, rivers, lakes, ponds, everything of which I don't know if we've measured the impact of airports on those things. But we do know, like the gentleman from Sierra Club said, or another commenter said, the enormous environmental impact of air travel as, so, you know, it's kind of irresponsible to expand for the sake of luxury. We are within proximity of 2 major airports, I think enough proximity. And I think because of the Cape's fragile environment, we shouldn't be asked to expand our airport. And I think there needs to be a lot more environmental study than just the, you know, the initial 5. There might need to be more than this process. And to measure the impacts. And I think that the money being spent, proposed to expand the airport from the feds or the state should be spent on all of the environmental degradation we've been experiencing. I mean, we have deadening of all the waters. Birds are dying. The insects are dying they depend on. I mean, what is it coming from? And PFAS are still going to be used. And it doesn't make any sense. It's like, where is this going to, it's just how much further can we go past a point of no fix? So, you know, I just think that we should really, really think about our home and, you know, our environment and what we can and can't do responsibly. Thank you.
Betsy Y.
Good evening. My name is Betsy Young. I'm the president of the Greater Hyannis Civic Association. I'm here to also make a statement about the PFAS in the water in Hyannis that is traveling through the sole source aquifer. According to the airport, the PFAS plume arrived at the Mara Wells in 2022. But earlier testing showed that the unique signature of the Cape Cod Gateway Airport PFAS had been found at the Mara Wells in 2020 at 70 nanograms per liter. And the same unique signature of PFAS has been detected in Mill Creek, West Yarmouth in 2018 at 30 nanograms per liter. The GHCA requests that the airport account for the presence of the unique PFAS component at these downgradient resources prior to 2022. The GHCA requests that all data pertaining to the Mara Wells, past, present, and future, for both raw water and treated, be readily available to all citizens. We would further request that the data for the town wells be made available. According to the Horsley Witten Group cover letter of the draft Phase 4 Remedy Implementation Plan dated January 19th, 2023 states, treatment at the Mara Wells is the most technologically and economically feasible remedial alternative to achieving a permanent solution with respect to groundwater. And Dan Santos further stated that the Mara Wells will contain all the PFAS in the Cape Cod Gateway Airport plume. We request that data or analysis be made available that illustrates how the Mara Wells will contain the entire plume for the Cape Cod Gateway Airport. Finally, the GHC requests that the approval of the Cape Cod Gateway Airport Master Plan by the town of Barnstable should be contingent on the Cape Cod Gateway Airport adequately addressing both past and present contamination. Thank you.
Betty L.
Good evening. My name is Betty Ludke. I'm a resident of the town of Barnstable. And thank you, Ms. Service, for the presentation tonight. You've done a beautiful job showing your alternative. And what I want to talk about, again, being your alternative, is the special arrangement that the airport has. They have an airport commission that answers to no one. In 2000 or about, the then president of the town council tried to, and I think did get a vote on the ballot to try to bring the airport commission under some sort of purview of the town. And the airport commission members at the time hired a cartoonist to put the president of the town council on top of a Cape Air airplane with a hammer, destroying it. And I don't know that that was the intent. And my intent in talking about this is the Airport Commission and Ms. Service have a very special responsibility because they do answer to no one. And maybe that's part of what we're seeing tonight, is that they're trying to work so hard on this airport. And even you mentioned many of these airports here in New England especially came from the 1920s. They were never intended to be what this is trying to be. And I think it's wrong to go down this path. It's a myopic path that's being taken by a commission that seems to be too self-serving. And I think we listened tonight, I listened to my constituents. There's some very grave concerns that don't seem to be listened to. And I want to say from 2007, the passenger throughput at this airport today is less than 5% of what it was in 2007. And it's almost as if we're going on the mentality, if we build it, they will come. Well, will they come, and do we want them to come? Because once you expand this runway, the FAA does not allow you to deny any user use of the airport. But if you don't have the runways, then you could deny a user. I mean, we have Chatham, we have Provincetown, beautiful general aviation. And I'm not sure, you renamed it the Cape Cod Gateway Airport. And it just seems to be getting in front of itself. Your airport restaurant, we had that meeting there yesterday. It's not a restaurant, it's just a room. And I just, one of the things that you and I had discussed was that you were going to put in your study an alternative to look at moving the air operations to Joint Base Cape Cod. I haven't seen any of that tonight. That doesn't mean you're not doing it, but I haven't seen it. I would have thought we'd have some mention of that alternative and how it's being studied. I'd love to see all of these animations that we've seen tonight put on the runways out there at the Joint Base Cape Cod, which is now being basically used by the U.S. Coast Guard that's out searching for the Titanic folks right now in the submarine, and an Army aviation unit. It's vastly underutilized. This airport is vastly underutilized. If you put the air operations together from these two vastly underutilized, you might have something. You might have some synergy. And as a federal taxpayer, I'm concerned about that, because I see as a town councilor, when you come through, that's the only thing you come to us for, is for the appropriations. And I see 90% of the bill from the FAA, that's federal tax money, and then 5% from Mass DOT, and then 5% from your enterprise fund. And we've heard that your enterprise fund, the number one source of revenue is jet fuel for corporate jets. And most of those jets leave their passengers on Nantucket and come here to park. I just find this a really good example of corporate welfare being paid by the federal government. And again, you've done a beautiful job presenting your alternative. But I hope that you as the commission, again, because you do have complete autonomy, I would hope you'd really, really look at this in an altruistic way and think about Cape Cod. We've heard about some of the environmental concerns. Think about our Cape Cod and what it might be to combine these air operations out there at a place that's willing, asking you to talk to them about the art of the possible, yet you won't talk to them. And that's why I really would like to know, how are you going to study that alternative of moving the operations to Joint Base Cape Cod? Because I hope it's going to be studied seriously. And I really appreciate the comments from folks tonight. And I'm not trying to rain on anybody's parade, but when you have complete autonomy, as you do, and I see some of your commissioners here, you have complete autonomy. I'm the town council out, we're out of it. Nobody else is involved in your decisions. You owe it to everybody to really think big and long. And we've had several people talking about aircraft doing whatever. Okay, JetBlue is a Part 121 operator. No Part 121 operator is going to deviate from exactly what they're supposed to do. So that idea, we had that one, the guy that went off to the left, then every JetBlue should be doing that. That is bizarre, in my opinion, as a 121 operator. It's very prescribed. And for the landings, everyone lands at a 3-degree glide slope. If you're not landing at a 3-degree glide slope, you're in an unsafe condition. So that is prescriptive. And this idea with the Cape Air pilots, I can't speak to those guys, but the 121 operators, and you as an airport could very easily impart some very strict arrival and departure controls. You could do that. Okay, thank you.
I just want to real quickly just respond to Councilor Lutke. Thank you for joining us tonight. Just one point of correction. The town council does choose our members of the airport commission, and we are a department of the town. So we work hand in hand with the town on anything that we're promoting at the airport or doing at the airport. We spend a lot of time making sure that our decisions that are being made, in full disclosure with our airport commission. But our airport commission is appointed by town council. So our members, the 7 members that we have on hand, are appointed by them, and that's typical. And we are a department of the town. I am an enterprise fund. So as an enterprise fund, we're obligated to be self-sufficient. We do not take any taxpayer dollars to be able to operate the airport. In regards to the percentages of what's coming from the federal government and from the state, that is coming from aviation user fees. So it is the aviation users that are putting into that airport improvement program, and that's how that program is developed and increased, and the dollar amounts that are in that program are from aviation users. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you for allowing me. I neglected to state when I was up here previous. I wanted to thank our elected officials that are here tonight that haven't been pointed out yet. Ms. Betty Look from Precinct 3 and Gordon Starr. Is there any other elected officials here that spent? No one? Okay. The last person I want to thank was the sergeant down the back for protecting us day and night.
Cindy V.
My name is Cindy Van Dorn. I live in the Hyannis Park area, and what I want to bring up is something that I don't think has been studied. I'm not that knowledgeable about it, but I've experienced it. I have read some studies, just the exhaust fuel. When these planes are taking off, when they're all the fuel and the oils and things that come out. I had been walking with a friend of mine around the bog where I live in Hyannis Park, and this huge jet came over us, and it was astounding. The smell It burned our eyes. We breathed it. This is falling down all over our communities. It's affecting our vegetables that we eat, on our gardens. It's affecting the air that we breathe, all this. I had seen a study online about some of the smaller planes. All our cars have to have unleaded fuels now. Some of the smaller planes, I have read that, and I don't know if that's true, but it was in the study, still have leaded engine fuel. And they did a study of all the children within 1.5 miles around this area, and the children were so full of lead compared to 2-3 miles out from this airport that had so much less. Now, something's not right here, and I don't know that anyone is really studying it. Does anyone of you that live close by or whatever, would you want to be breathing this stuff and having it all surrounding you? The noise is one thing, but this is something that concerns me, that's all. And if someone could give me some sort of insight on that, that would be wonderful. But I breathed it, it made my eyes run, it made us cough, and that wasn't good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to let you know that air quality and greenhouse gas emissions will be addressed in the draft environmental impact report. The document will follow what FAA requires in terms of analysis in comparison to national ambient air quality standards, also known as NAAQS, another fun acronym, as well as what MEPA, the state agency, requires for analysis.
I did want to bring up that because this airport is just in such a very packed area. It's affecting 1.5 miles. It's taking up all of Hyannis. It's taking up Hyannis Park, basically. It's affecting so many people just if this fuel is the problem that I believe it is. Just some kind of exhaust thing. Something has to be thought about it. That's all. Thank you.
Yes, and I should also add that we also look at that data also and the cumulative impacts on our environmental justice communities. So there's a lot of interwoven analysis that we would probably need to be here for another week to once you see the volume that we're producing for the draft EIR. So we're tried to hit the highlights and the concerns that we heard at the last meeting. But again, there will be a lot of more in-depth and technical analyses provided.
I'm sorry, we had 2 questions. If you could continue, and then we'll.
I just want to comment that Hyannis area is very, very populated. It could be in a better situation.
Yeah, no, I understand your concerns. I did pop back up onto the screen the regulatory categories that we are including in the development of the DEIR. So obviously, the air quality is one of the top items that you see there listed within the list. Those are the areas and the resource areas that we are looking at as part of the draft report that will be produced at the end of the summer.
So when you do this analysis and you put all the numbers together, are you going to include right after the snow falls, when the air is cleaner, right after the rain, all through the winter? Are you going to do it, are you going to do it like the noise, or are you going to do it collectively so that we know the real facts?
So we're doing it in accordance with what the FAA and the state and local agencies require. So those are detailed in guidance documents. We do have air quality engineers at my company that follow these prescriptive methods. So that's a comment that I would have to defer to them and get back to you on exactly what their methodologies are.
I do want to acknowledge it's about 8:15 for anyone who may have to get home or anything like that. But our next comment is from Chris G.
Good evening. I'm Chris Greeley. I'm from Hyannis Park. And I have to tell you that it's now been almost 4 decades since I have been involved and concerned about airport issues. And that during the mid-'80s, was actually exceedingly concerned about it and actually helped to work with a group of people where we finally got a Part 150 study done around the airport and some of the issues that were going on. During the course of that, several of us developed a relationship with the FAA, and I actually was invited to go to the FAA headquarters in Burlington, Mass., where I sat at a table with them, and they stated to me, and I swear under oath, God and everybody else's graves or anything else, that they said to me that if the airport was to come to them at that point in time to ask to build a location, an airport in this location, it would be denied, and that there were significant and serious issues for such a thing. This developed out of a narrow military airstrip. It was never really designed to be a gateway airport with massive jets coming in and out of it, and it becomes even more crucial, I believe now, when I see the kind of development and the things that are going on. And it isn't just, I think sometimes people just think, oh, it's Hyannis Park that's complaining. When I listen to the variety of people who are here tonight, realize the incredible impact. But in particular, I have been astounded by the amount of building that has been done on the Barnstable or Hyannis side of things with the apartment complexes. And also, if you recall, during the whole Vineyard Wind hearings, one of the big things was that electric substation created at the end of that runway, not that far off of it, had to have very special permitting, very, very special construction done because the dielectric fluids that were going to be contained in there. And during the time of the testimony in the Barnstable, right here in the town council chambers, and even in Yarmouth, your town manager, McLaughlin, testified that simply a few ounces of an escape of that fluid could actually poison thousands and thousands of gallons of groundwater. And so now we have an extension on that particular runway that will overfly, the planes can overfly that area of not only all the increased housing, but the power station for Vineyard Wind. In addition, I have also wondered, and one of the questions wasn't answered, whereas the sensor was in West Yarmouth, because one of the things we found during those 1980, 1990s Part 150 studies was that they were placing sensors in very odd places. It turned out they were in areas where actually the planes weren't really flying over them, and they were gathering the data again at odd hours of the day or at odd hour months where air traffic had disappeared. It wasn't during the summer months, so they had some wonderful statistics about the lack of the air noise over us. And so my concern now is where is the current sensors. I am very concerned about the tracking. Even though I've had these concerns all these years, I very, very rarely call and complain to the airport. I had several instances, 2 instances in the last 6 months where I did call to complain, because where I live, I had a plane literally on 2 different occasions fly up Glenwood Street from Hyannis Harbor and make a left-hand turn over my house. When I asked for the statement showing the tracking of where the plane had flown, I was given a map showing that the plane had flown directly in over Lewis Bay, sort of nowhere near my house. It was a bizarre kind of experience to find that was the tracking equipment even accurate with that. And so I do think that, and Cindy Van Doren already mentioned part of this, but in the last several weeks, there have been significant news articles about the studies that are taking place. First of all, about the impact of noise on lifespan and the fact that exposure to noise actually can decrease your lifespan by as much as 3 years, depending upon the quality of it. And people have talked about how disturbed their everyday life is in their own yards and living room. Secondly, the whole study also has just come out in the last week or so about the whole issue of environmental toxins, much like Cindy talked about. And I have to tell you, I had the most bizarre experience yesterday because I was over on the airport, in the airport parking lot, when a very
very large jet took off heading over Hyannis. I watched some of the largest black clouds of something streaming out of the back end of that plane as it left for quite an extended period of time. And it was really quite scary then to think about what else besides PFAS and other things are actually falling into our life. I know I was an educator. We didn't like to see children who were living within so much certain proximity to actually busy roadways, because we found the environmental impact on their health was significant because of exposure. So I'm just wondering what some of these exposures are. Thank you for listening.
This person, I'm not sure.
Tom Sullivan?
Okay, Tom, thank you. It looks like a J.
Hi, I'm Tom Sullivan. I live in a different part of West Yarmouth. I'm up by the Bayberry Golf Course, which has been very quiet because the runway's closed. All the noise is going down to Hyannis Park and Barnstable. I've been involved with this airport, dates back to 2000 after I retired from the Air Force. I'm the former chairman of the Yarmouth Airport Advisory Committee, which is no longer exists. The town of Yarmouth hired a consultant. So I'm familiar with the studies, and I'll start with the noise study. When you did this study here in August of 22, did you use ground meters to measure the noise? Were there actually meters placed on the ground, and where were they?
No, we use the FAA's modeling program.
So this is a computer job, a computer-based.
The approved FAA modeling program for DNL levels.
So there's nothing physically done on the as far as
We
it
do
goes?
not have any sensors.
Okay. You used to have a sensor here at the airport.
That was part of the 150 study.
No, there were sensors put in from one of the managers, probably 2004, 2005.
I'd have to check back on that. I'm
Okay,
not familiar with that.
On this modeling that you're using, I question whether or not KPAir should be used. I think an independent source should come in and fly the 402s. KPAir has a conflict of interest with this airport, have a financial interest at this airport. Back to 1999-90, the present owner, he's not the present owner, but the owner of the company was on a subcommittee of the airport. So I wonder enough and I questioned the studies then, and I still question the studies today whether they're accurate. Because when they take off on 6, and what's the opposite end? 24? When they come over me, they come off the instrument flight path, they head for Nantucket. They don't throttle back. They're full throttle. Now, since I have a new phone where I can actually do decibel readings. Okay, and when you do open that runway, I'll be doing that with them. This past Sunday, I was down at Baxter Avenue Beach. It's right under your beam coming into the airport, and I caught JetBlue coming in. Caught a 402 before that. He ran about 85 decibels over my head. Single event, right over my head. JetBlue ran 92, a little bit, or even higher. Now, I have to admit that it was overcast, ceiling was low. But that's just one incident. I have not been able to get takeoff on the noise, which eventually I will. But the 92 decibel was loud. All right, and there were kids at a motel next door, and they were complaining how loud it was. So just to give you an idea on this. Go back to the runways map, if you could. I have a question on your overrun there. 1533? 33. The one Willow Street, Yarmouth Road. Yeah, we want to extend it out on the 4. Right there, that one, no, either one. Do you have a red laser? I want to point out something. See the dark area? Go to your right. See this area Put my arms down. All right, where are we here? It's not working. There it is. All right, see this area up in here? Right in here? The Maha wells aren't too far from here.
No, they're not.
They're not. I'm questioning whether or not you're going to extend this area into a wellhead protection area. Wellhead protection area 1 or a 2. This is water in here. This is a water area in that area. So whether or not you're in you're going to expand this into a wellhead protection area, I don't know if the DEP is going to allow that.
So to clarify that those red trapezoids represent the runway protection zones, that's an air surface. There's no proposed actual work associated with those trapezoids.
So the work is going to end right here?
There's no work currently proposed right there.
The yellow, where the yellow is, that's the proposed extension on the other.
All right, so it ends right here.
No.
No.
No, the other end.
Up
All
in
the
here?
way, no, keep going left.
Right here is the existing end of the runway.
Yep.
There's nothing proposed on this end of the runway. It stays the same.
Okay.
The proposed extension is here on 115N, going towards Independence Park.
All right. Okay. Well, that gets into another question that I had, and I don't know if you have the answer. On your JetBlue aircraft that you're presently using, how much runway does it use when it takes off?
It depends on the day.
Yep.
It depends on the temperature. It depends on
I
how many
understand that.
passengers and fuel they have on board. Is that about right?
Yeah,
So the existing Embraer 190, about 5,290 feet is what they typically need. That runway is 5,253 feet. They'll take off with a little less fuel or a little less baggage, but
So
typically.
we're
they
using, what,
need-
4,000 feet for
They're
rotation?
typically using most of the runway.
For rotation. How much runway is left if they have to abort for safety reasons?
I don't know the answer to that, but they're the pilots. They crank in that information. They know what field they can operate in
They are
and out of.
cranking, and that's a big, heavy aircraft. If they're using most of that runway, they don't have anything, just when they come down and have to abort a takeoff, have you going to come up with any type of design to stop the aircraft from leaving the property? Because there's no runway left. That's zero runway. I have raised the safety. That's a safety concern that I have to raise. Same way with the other end towards the Independence Park area. Okay?
So just to respond to that really quickly, airports have what we call a runway safety area. It's
Yeah.
an overrun by 1,000 feet on either side of that runway. That's what we have. On 624, we have an EMAS bed, which is equivalent level of safety to provide for that overshoot. The pilots, obviously, when they're making their determination to utilize a particular field, they know the runway length, they know what they have to put into their calculations for the temperature changes, for the passenger load, for the fuel load. They make their calculations to determine the safetiness of operating on an airfield. They're not going to operate if they're not in a safe environment.
Well, that's something that maybe we should look into a little bit on that, because that EMS area was, I think, designed for 402s. I'm familiar with the aircraft that went through that area into the parking lot, and the only thing that stopped that, and of course, the EMS wasn't there, but the only thing that stopped that was the fence. And every one of those poles on that Iana Road was pulled out, and that plane was pretty much almost across the parking lot. The other thing, a couple of questions that came up at the last meeting. Things that might have been buried at the airport. Have you looked into that?
So we're constructing the runway project right now. We have not had any indication of anything that has been buried under the airfield. Obviously, we haven't dug up every part of the airfield to determine whether or not there were old, military remnants that have been left behind. But the vast majority of the airport has been touched at some point in time. Obviously, I've been at the airfield for 8.5 years.
Yeah.
We've done a lot of construction projects on that. We reconstructed the entirety of runway 1533. We remodeled in, all of the side safety areas and the grass over there. Nothing was found at that point in time. All safety areas, all 4 have been designed within the past 20 years. Nothing was found during that point. We're currently have ripped apart 624 to reestablish that runway and rehabilitate that runway, and we're also working in the side safety areas for that runway, and we have not seen anything of what you have
That was brought up at
reported.
the last meeting. I just wanted to do a follow-up. The other one is, I made, and you sent me an email on Upper Gates Pond. There was a study done when we had the committee. They looked at Upper Gates Pond. They did find lead contamination there. Now, you sent me an email, they don't believe that there is any lead found there. Now, is that true? There is no lead been found there?
I would have to get back to you and have Horsley Witten Group get back to you, but based on the email that they sent you, they did not find levels that you were
Well,
concerned with.
there was lead found, and it was supposedly just above, in the ground, just above the aquifer, and they didn't want to touch it because they were afraid it would go into the aquifer. So if they don't find anything now, then it's seeped in. There's a
I'll
possibility.
have to find out information for you. I don't have that for you this evening.
Yeah, because it was definitely there. And the other thing about Otis, quite a few comments here. I'm familiar with Otis. I retired out of there. Otis has 2 main runways. The runways run similar to the airport. They run 1432, 05, just a couple, 1 degree off the Hyannis Airport. We've actually had planes that come in up there thinking they were landing in Hyannis. We're looking at 6,000 feet max here. The airport runways at Otis, which were done, completely rebuilt in 94, 95, run 10,000 feet, and the overruns included. The other runway runs 12,000 feet with a huge extension because the runway was set up and designed for a shuttle landing. We had to go in when the shuttle went up down to Florida. The shuttle aborted within 5 minutes of launch. Otis was its main base, one of its main bases to land up here. That's how fast it was coming up the coast. That's a long runway. We're talking 6,000 compared to 10 and 12,000 foot runways. All this money going in here, you don't have to build a new runway up there. I think it's seriously that a feasibility study should be done about the base. They did look at it with the terminal. They kind of pushed it off. I know for a fact the gentleman here from the Sierra Club mentioned about the extraction system that needs to be done for the PFAS. Well, I'm familiar with the pollution up there because my job as a cop was to make sure that if there was any pollution, it got reported right away. We were trained. They are using an extraction system today and have been for over 20 years, the Air Force. The United States Air Force Office of Environmental Excellence. They have an office up there. If you make an appointment, maybe they'll go in and let you explain what they're doing. But these are huge oil filters. It looks like an oil filter in a building. And it pipes up like that. And it takes the water from the aquifer, filters it, the ones within the plumes, and puts it back in the air. I don't know if you could afford something like that, but that's what they do up there. So as far as the environmental, they're cleaning up there more than what I think we got here. As far as your Maha wells, we warned back in the 2004 and 2005 about the plumes going into the wells from the airport. They started from Cape Air, hangar, goes across and into the Maha wells. Of course, you know the end result.
Tom?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. We do have a few more people who had signed up.
Okay, I'm almost done.
Okay.
Okay? I just don't like being a, thank you. As I said, I've been doing this a long time. So, as I said, I know that and one final question. Mass Aeronautic Commission deals with joint facilities in this state. Hanscom Air Force Base is a joint facility with Massport. Westover is a joint facility with the Air Force Reserve, and Westfield, where the F-15s are now, is a joint facility that's out in the Mass Aeronautic Commission. And the FAA, there's no reason why we can't have it up at Otis. Thank you.
I'll point out that we are addressing the Joint Base Cape Cod alternative in the written document. As Tom mentioned, it was addressed in a prior document in 2003. A lot of those constraints with the transition of town airport to a state-owned, federally leased property still exist. So some of those issues and challenges are beyond the scope of what we could possibly evaluate for environmental impacts, but we will look at it in terms of what are the environmental impacts.
Thank you, Alyssa. We have 5 questions left. It is about 8:35. So Rachel Y.
Good evening. I'm Rachel Youngling from West Yarmouth. First, a comment. I'd like to thank you for offering this twice today. I did sit through the Zoom presentation today, and being able to hear it twice was really beneficial for me, especially because I missed about 20% of it with overflight over my house, with just one window open in my house. I'm trying to get my head around DNL and understanding how the FAA looks at noise, because I know our individual experiences are very large, but you're looking at the FAA requirements and how it works within their parameters. So as I understand it from what's been said this evening, in this master plan, in this phase, one is allowed to use data provided by the airline manufacturers to the FAA on their noise contours. That goes into a database, and a computer program then tells us what the DNL is. Is that correct?
So it's the AEDT modeling software is what is required to predict the DNL from an airport. That software has, just what you said, a catalog of aircraft data that is provided by the FAA within that software, and you essentially tell the software all of the flight activities, all of the takeoffs, all of the landings on all of the runways, and it calculates the DNL from that information.
Okay.
Does that answer your?
That answers my question, because I think what we as a community are feeling as a concern is that, yes, this information was valid at some point, but did it call into account the age of the aircraft, and that as mechanical problems arise over the age of an aircraft, it is going to get noisier? Does this software program account for the vast capacity we give to the pilots coming in and out of Cape Cod Gateway Airport? As we've heard many times, it's the pilot who gets to choose however they want to take off or land. And I see that on a daily basis over my home. JetBlue does follow the same path all the time, as Ms. Ludke pointed out, because they come directly over the center of my house. Many other airlines go various different ways at different points in time. And so I just want to understand from my comments that I'll be making as part of this process, where we can affect change. And so as I understand it, FAA completely accepts this software program as valid information, and there's no requirement for a 150 noise study or any instrumentation study.
That's correct. The FAA actually requires the use of the software, not accepts it. There is no alternative that we would be allowed to use to then compare to these metrics.
Okay. And does the FAA have any parameters to account for seasonality at an airport?
In the modeling software, that it's essentially built in, so it assumes default values. I think what you're getting at is that there are obviously differences on a day-to-day and moment-to-moment basis. So stepping away from the DNL for a minute, because that obviously doesn't correlate well with what you're experiencing the moment a plane is passing over. And that's why some of those other metrics that we introduced show a better correlation. It doesn't change the result that we're telling you, but it changes what the values you're seeing will make more sense as far as what you would measure in real time as a plane passes overhead. That's what the SEL, the LEQ, the LMAX, all of these metrics are in that software. You can pull that out of the software. We can make figures of all those different metrics. But when it comes time to compare what the FAA considers a noise impact, that is where we have to stick with the DNL value.
And just as a citizen not related to this whole process, is it possible for us to see a daily DNL chart over the course of a year for runway 1533, just as a perspective to make us recognize that we're not losing our minds, I think, is really part of the process. Because as we experience sound, you did a great job of presenting sound levels, and that 90 decibels is equivalent to a lawnmower. But every flight event that I experience over my house is louder than a lawnmower. And we did go through a period at the Hyannis Park Civic Association where a number of us had noise meters and we were tracking that. But at that point, we misunderstood because we thought it was single event noise, and it took us a bit to comprehend the concept of DNL.
Yeah, just for reference, 90 decibels, I think a 65 DNL from a 90 decibel event, you would need probably 100 of those events. So those are the real values that you are stating.
Okay, thank you very much.
Karen, I.
Hi, I'm Karen Injami, and I live in Hyannis Park area. And I just have a couple quick questions because it's getting dark, and my voice seems I hate public speaking. But I just wanted to ask a question, Katie. The pilot in command of flying is required to fly at a safe altitude, right? So what is the lowest, the minimum that they can fly? How low over a residential area?
Well, I think you have to put it into perspective with what activity they're doing. So obviously, if they're arriving to the airport and they're in the landing configuration, they will be lined up to land at the runway. So they will be at a different elevation that prepares them to land on the runway. If they're departing, they would also be at a different elevation.
But how would we know that they're, like right now, they're flying 225 feet above our homes?
So Town Councilor Ludke had made reference to a glide path.
Yeah.
So pilots that are coming into the runway will, if they're on instrument approach, or they try to follow a glide path, which is a 3-degree is the standard. Some airports have different standards, but a 3-degree is the standard. That will bring different aircraft in at different levels in the landing configuration. So I really can't answer your question as to what is appropriate. It depends on the aircraft. It depends on how fast they're arriving.
So the FAA has no regulation standard for flying over homes?
The FAA does have standards for flying over populated areas, unpopulated areas. They do have standards.
I thought that was 500 feet.
It is, but when you're in a landing configuration, you're landing, so you will be low because you want to get to the ground.
Okay, and my other question was, I had sent in an email to Christine that we had a plane flying in June 2nd. It was leaving the airport. It was under 500 feet, and when I looked at the decibel reader, it was 103.3. So on June 2nd, I had like 17 planes between 2 and 515, and the average was like 87 decibel readings when I averaged them, because they range from 74.3 to 103.3, and that's pretty loud. And I don't think, the way you're measuring it is correct, because unless you're sitting on my deck or Rachel's deck, you have no idea how loud this is. I mean, when you have to sit on your deck and put your hands in your ears, and people can't even talk. I don't know, it's crazy. Tonight, we were sitting there with company, a plane came over, 4:37, 4:41, 5:15, 5:17, 5:18, 5:20, 5:24, and 5:30. So when you have a Cape Air that has 10 seats or a Traveler that has 10 to 12 seats, I don't know, are they standing in line on Nantucket to come over every 2 minutes? Are these planes filled with people or one person? I don't understand why every 2 minutes we have, that planes are coming over. And I'm concerned of the impact of low-flying planes, the air pollution, like people have said, the fuel that's being exhausted, the noise. What's that impact on the residents? So that's just my concern. I mean, I've got data here that I've sent to Christine. I just sent a memo, 275 feet, 250, 225. This is all data I've collected from DBL. I mean, I sit on my deck all day every 2 minutes and just flick my reader. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I just hope that you have a slide up there that says concerns for residents and you address them. I see all solutions. I see a lot of solutions to all your airport issues, but I don't see a slide up there that's addressing any of our questions. I don't see a slide up there that's saying, hey, we'll look into noise. Maybe we can send someone to the neighborhood and measure it, or yeah, they're flying too low, or this is how much, yeah, there is fuel that's being, distributed when planes are flying over. I don't know. I just don't ever see a slide up there that addresses the residents' issues. I mean, it's all solutions for the airport. So, yeah, if you could just put a slide up there that addresses the issue and the concerns of all of us, I mean, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you.
Do we have a member of town council in the audience? We just have some insight as to their position.
I think that, I'm not going to speak for you, Gordon, but I think that might put you. Yeah. So I think, we have one counselor that's here now. I think that would be a conversation to actually have with the town council, not with one member.
We'll talk about that and address all of it.
You can come to town council and there's a couple of comment time, so we'll have to get
Can you invite West Yarmouth residents who are affected as well?
Yes, public, so, right? Yes. Yeah. So, yes,
Ashley, do we have anyone else? Because I know we want to try to wrap up here soon.
Yes, Michael Q.
Hi, my name is Michael Quinn. I live on Baxter Ave in West Yarmouth. I had sort of a list of stuff. I want to talk about decibel readings, but I think Karen did a great job, who sits on her porch. I've done similar type things on my porch with my little decibel. I don't know how accurate it is. The DNL thing, I get it. It's a government thing. It's a little bit BS because it says that everything's okay here. But if you've heard anybody sitting here tonight, we can't open our windows in the morning because we're awakened. Don't really want to put central air in. I'm sorry, I'm looking at you for this, but yeah. So the DNL thing, I mean, you heard what it did to my wife. It sent her over the edge. But over the last several years, my hearing has gone down the tubes. Spent a lot of time with audiologists, learning a lot about hearing loss, the impact of hearing loss on the human condition, which I think someone else spoke about earlier tonight. Yeah, I think, noise levels within the 94 to 112 is dangerous. It's a dangerous hearing level. And granted, DNL is going to say, not a problem, right? We're not Logan Airport. We're not like 1,000 planes in and out over the course of the day. But if you're sitting on my back porch or Karen's back porch or Linda's deck or Tom out by the golf course, a lot of times in the day, you hit the pause button on TV for 30 seconds. Or you're in the middle of a conversation. You have to, my neighbor talking across the fence. You have to stop conversations. And then we heard about, sort of off-gassing from jet fuel and all that kind of stuff. And so I hope our town can hear our voice and raise these issues. And there's an amazing amount of work that's been done to try to justify this thing, to justify the expansion. And that's what consultants do. But because I've worked for big companies like that before, and I know how that works, but someone needs to step up for the people that live in the flight path of this airport and help us make some decisions. Because this is not the quality of life that I grew up expecting to come down and live on the Cape, and it's not a legacy I want to leave my kids. My kids won't let me sell a house. I could probably get them to sell it just by explaining to them sort of what's going on with our environment, with the noise, and the impact that it's going to have on them as young adults and as their children. I'm not sure I want my kids swimming in Lewis Bay anymore because of PFAS. And God only knows what else is coming out of jet streams. And that's a really sad state of affairs. So thank you for your time. And thank you.
Our last two comments will be from Felicia and then Linda.
Hi, good evening. I really appreciate you sitting and listening to us. I get up at 4:15 every morning, so this is way past my bedtime. But I did anybody hear, I think it was last Friday, I didn't write down the date, that really early in the morning, like 5-something, loud jet thing. I couldn't tell if it was taking off or landing. I don't know how that happens. Don't planes need approval from the tower to take off and land? I don't know how that works. So I'm just throwing that out there because nobody talked about it, but I was stunned. I was out feeding feral cats and birds and all that other stuff. It was horrible.
You're talking about the loud jets that came over? There were 2 F-15s out of Westfield, that's been confirmed.
No, I think they landed here. They either took off or landed here, whatever it was.
There were 2 F, but there were 2.
Because it definitely wasn't there. It was definitely low in here.
Yeah, I think the F-15s did do a flyby by the airport before they went out to Westfield.
Good for them. Woke everybody up. Anyway, I couldn't agree more with those suggesting you look at Joint Base Cape Cod and the opportunities it presents. And it's my understanding the General is looking forward to a conversation with you. And I don't understand, why not just have a conversation? Who does it hurt? I wrote a letter to the Cape Cod Times in support of Ms. Ludke's editorial that she wrote, and they chose not to print it. I'm a native of Hyannis. I live right down near Highline. I can walk here. It takes me 16 minutes. And so I hear much of what you do, although I'm not I am under one of the flight paths because I get stuff over my house all the time also between the hospital and me. So it does come in that direction too. I'm very concerned that people need to get above the specific stuff and look at the holistic view. I mean, because I'm a native of Hyannis and I've lived in this house my entire life, Hyannis right now is nothing but a parking lot. That's what we're turning into, and it's disgusting. We're a parking lot for steamship. We're a parking lot for Highline, your competition. And we're a parking lot evidently for corporate jets, too, because Nantucket can't sell fuel over there. How sad. And I understand jet fuel is probably a really good business to be in, and I don't want to deprive anybody of that, but it needs to be in the right place. All I can think of is if all of the properties that were parking lots could be used to a higher and better. Oh yeah, I know it's cash. I get it. I've watched it since I was a little kid. I get it. if all the properties used for parking could have a higher, better use economic development around the harbor and on all in the residential areas that have parking lots, et cetera, it would be a much better village to live in. Land is limited, and it's a precious commodity, as we all know, especially in Hyannis. And 20-something years ago, when I was on the Cape Cod Economic Development Council, which I did chair for several years, I had a similar thought as Mr. Phelan did, that it's time to move the airport. If we were to design Hyannis today, would anyone think that that's the right location to put an airport? Of course not. So I won't talk about my vision and how wonderful it is for what we could do with that land. Housing comes to mind, of course. A beautiful byway that could cut traffic from Yarmouth Road over to Independence Park, so you didn't have to come into the local area if you didn't want to need to be there, et cetera, et cetera. But I just want to encourage people to please have a conversation with the general. You owe it to all of us. Talking and listening never hurt anybody. Look at all the problems you could solve. I think we could get a case study from MIT Business School or anybody else to figure out how all those parking lot operators who earn a very nice living off of that, I don't want to take that away from them, but I think somebody could come up with a model where they could all share in the future parking, just in a different location. The future of the airport and our public health is too important to be subject to power plays and politics. And I just want to say, planes aren't the only thing with really high and unhealthy decibel readings. The high-speed ferry does too. I've personally measured levels at my house, not even going down to the harbor, but just in my driveway, over 100 decibels when the ferry's at the dock idling, which is a neutral, which makes no sense to me that the engine has to be so loud, but when it's leaving and coming. So, and I know that ferries aren't your problem, but I'm just saying it compounds the issue for those of us who live here in the village. We're kind of being bombarded. So we look to you to take the high road, look at the big picture. You could really help us by talking and listening to what the general has to say. Thank you.
I am. Okay, thank you. I get to wrap this up, and I'm thrilled to do that. And I'm going to throw this back to all of you fine people from the airport, your consultants, your lawyers, everybody. We need another meeting, and we need to focus on PFAS exclusively. And I appreciate that you have taken some of tonight's time and talked about had the opportunity to listen to comments. Well, there's a ton of research that has happened over the past 6 months, including follow-ups by the Harvard researchers who researched Hyannis Park's Mill Creek. So we need an opportunity to come back here and chat with all of you again, but exclusively on PFAS. So
That is not a problem. We can do that.
excellent. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. We do appreciate them. We'll take a look at what we've heard tonight. We will be in touch with this group. Please make sure that in the sign-up sheet you provided your contact information so we can make sure that we can get you that detail. Please be looking for the draft report that we will have at the end of the summer available to you that will have more detail as well. So thank you and have a good night.